This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 20. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 20. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 9. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 9. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room.
Okay, right. Welcome, members, and declare the meeting open. In the room today, I have Robin Newton, then I have the Vice Chair, Kelly Armstrong, I have Andy Allen, and I have Alex Eason. And on Starleaf with us, we have Mark Durkin and Sinead Ennis. So you're all very welcome today. I'll start then off on agenda item number 1, which is apologies. We haven't received any apologies at this stage, so I'll move on to item.
Sure.
Sorry, go ahead, Sinead.
Yeah, can I give an apology for Fra, please?
Absolutely, no problem. Thank you. Okay, I'll move on to agenda item 2, which is chairperson's business. So it's just to let members know that, well, some of you were present there. On Tuesday, the committee held its first agreed series of informal stakeholders briefing events. For those who were unable to attend, the topic was housing, and we heard from Justin Cartwright from the Chartered Institute of Housing, Mark Graham from Co-Ownership, Mark Spence from the Construction Employers Federation, NI, and Bernadine McCrory from the Alzheimer's Society. I think members that were there would agree with me. It was a very successful event, and it gave that opportunity for those witnesses to brief the committee and to be open and honest with the committee. I think it was especially good that Bernadine was included in that as well, and the problems that people with dementia face when it comes to housing. So I just want to say that I've asked the clerks to go now and look at a second event in the new year. We haven't decided what that topic will be. There are lots of people who have written to come in and brief us, but all being well, we'll get one organised for then. Any member want to make any comment on that? Or happy enough to move on? Okay. All right, so, but you're happy enough that we arranged then another one for January, because it was really worthwhile. Yeah, all right, good stuff. Okay then, another one thing I want to say, we have a very full agenda for the meeting of the 10th and 17th of December, including the Minister offering to brief the committee again at the meeting on the 17th of December to cover housing, Casement Park and the sub-regional stadia programme. So members, for both of those days, I want to propose that we start again at 9 a.m. on both of those dates. So that again is the 10th and the 17th. For a 9 a.m. start. Yes, Kelly?
I was just going to ask, I know the Minister has said that she wasn't intending to open the Job Start scheme while we're in this current circuit breaker, but we still haven't had any details on the Job Start scheme, and it may be starting about that time. Is she intending to give us
someone wants to speak here?
Yes, we are getting a briefing.
Yeah, they've offered a briefing, I think, on the 10th of December.
Okay.
There you are. That's
Thank
okay.
you. Thank you.
I know the committee had written and we hadn't received responses back the past few weeks. So the 10th of December, yes,
Okay.
We're getting a briefing on that.
Excellent.
Okay, that's good. All right, so members happy enough with our 9 a.m. starts then?
Yeah.
That'll do, good stuff. Then also members, after our meeting on the 12th of November, we wrote to the department on the issue of the musical instruments for band scheme to support a 3-week extension to the time period for applications. We still have not had a reply, and the deadline for the scheme has passed. It passed on Monday, so we still haven't received a reply on that. I know that the question was asked of, Maurice Bradley asked it in topicals in the chamber on Monday, and the Minister was at that stage was unaware of any letter that the committee had sent, and was also seemed quite shocked that it was only a 17-day turnaround. Given the fact that many of these bands or individuals or groups or whatever that may be haven't had the opportunity to meet up or to discuss funding. So members, I would propose that we write again just through to the Minister and ask what has been done on that, if that's okay. Yes?
Yeah.
Okay, good stuff. All right, then I'm going to move on to agenda item number 3, which is the draft minutes. If members want to turn to page 6, they'll find the draft minutes of the 19th of November 2020. Can I ask our members content to agree those minutes?
Agreed.
As drafted, yes?
Agreed.
Agreed? Okay, thank you. Okay, then we'll move on to agenda item 4, which is matters arising. Members have been provided at page 12 with a reply from the Ulster Orchestra to committee queries following their recent briefing session. The orchestra has confirmed that it is using social media to attract new fans and has no evidence of musicians leaving Northern Ireland to go elsewhere to perform, and they have provided a link to the online Christmas concert. So members, any comments or queries on that, or content to note that as well? Yeah, okay. Then can I move on and inform members, again, you've been provided page 14 with a letter from Sport NI on phase 2 of the COVID-19 grants for sporting organisations. Sport NI has provided a comprehensive reply outlining how it plans to administer phase 2 COVID-19 grants for sporting. The reply also provides details of the application criteria, a breakdown of the funds distributed to date, and a list of the organisations that have received those funds. Again, are members content to note or any comments on that? Content? Okay.
Content.
Then again, if I can ask members then to turn to page 35 of their packs, and they'll find a letter there from Belfast City Council in relation to the redevelopment of Albany Leisure Centre site. I know we've had a bit of back and forward on this one. The Council has confirmed that it recognises the IFA as the key organisation responsible for the development of football in Belfast and has engaged extensively with the IFA in the development of Albany. It highlights that Albany is part of the Council's Leisure Transformation Programme, which is a £105 million investment in 7 brand new leisure centres across the city. And following consultation with a wide range of industry experts and key stakeholders, including the IFA, it was decided that the redevelopment of Albany would focus largely on outdoor 3G football pitch provision because of the lack of council-owned 3G pitch provision in East Belfast. Again, members, content to note that we've finally got that all clarified, yes?
Yeah.
Content? Thank you.
Take my word for it.
Okay, thank you, Robin. Okay, and then I have one more final thing, and that's at page 38 of your meeting packs. You'll find a further departmental update on the COVID-19 Charities Fund. The fund closed on Friday the 21st of August 2020. 640 applications had been submitted and all 501 eligible charities were supported. As the committee heard at last week's meeting, there was a total spend of 8.8, leaving 6.7 million available to support charities from the 1st of October 2020 to the 31st of March 2020. And also the Minister has indicated that she wishes to launch pre-application information in December, and a call for applications will open on the 6th of January until, is that, yeah, 6th of January until the 22nd of January 2021, yeah. Okay, members, are members content with that as well, to note that also? Yeah.
Could I just
yes.
ask, Chair, in terms of the bodies that were not supported under it, as really just for information, I suppose, in terms of those charitable organisations who made an application and the 100 and whatever it was who were ruled ineligible for support, if we could maybe try and understand why, what type of bodies they were and why they didn't meet the criteria. Chair.
Okay, I think we might be able to ask that of our next people in the brief as well, because we've CO3 our next brief, so we can ask them, but we can also ask the department as well.
Yeah, okay.
That's perfectly, yeah, okay. Kelly?
Yeah, the last line on page 39 of our pack there, where the officials be happy to provide further information. I think it would be useful to have that. I know that we do have CO3 coming in, but the department are the ones who are handling the criteria for this grant. It would be good to see what that is. As Robin has said, there were a number who weren't successful before, and I don't know whether that's poorly filled out application forms. They were maybe charities based elsewhere, or what the crack is, but it's just to see what the criteria is, because there's a few outstanding charity grants due. Dormant Accounts is supposed to be looking at sustainability of charities, so what's this one for? If it's just to get them through COVID, fine, but if we could get clarification just what that's for.
Okay, fair enough. Mark, you wanted to come in?
Thank you, Chair, and CO3 might be able to clear up some of these things, but I think some of these questions are more pertinent for the department. Robin there touched on those charities that were ineligible. It is important that we understand why they weren't able to qualify, but we also have to be cognizant of the fact that there are many charities out there who didn't apply for various reasons. They might have already determined that they wouldn't be eligible and therefore didn't bother applying. Because they had reserves and that would have knocked them out. Now those reserves this many months on will have been depleted, so there'll probably be more people eligible now than were for the first tranche of funding. Also just a wee concern maybe in terms of time. If the fund is going to be released on the 6th, it's good to have the pre-application information out there first, but when's it going to close, and when are charities going to get the money they so badly need, and when are they going to have it spent by? You know, I know this is going to apply to a number of departments and a number of sectors, but you just fear we're creating a sort of Brewster's Millions situation where, having waited so long for money and support, that whenever they do get it, they might not have time to spend it.
I think that's a very good point, Mark. I know it says here that the application process will close on the 22nd of January. I know certainly from speaking to people from the arts as well, and they are saying, you know, by the time the money comes through, they have 6 weeks to spend this money, which isn't a great deal of time for what they need. So I think there is an issue around that, and that's across the board for any funding. So yeah, I think there needs to be better, a lot more clarity on that. No, thanks for that, Mark. All right, members, any other comments or queries on that part before we move on? Nope, okay. Then we'll move on to agenda item 5, which is a briefing by CO3 on the impact of COVID-19 on the charity sector. Can I inform members that their papers are at the agenda item is at page 41 of their meeting packs, and can I welcome to the meeting Nora Smith, Sarah Quinlan and Barry Mccauley. You're all there with us. I can see Sarah and I can see Nora. And I can see Barry. Happy days.
Chair,
Good.
can I just declare an interest as a charity trustee, please?
You can indeed, Andy, no problem. Okay, Nora, is it yourself? I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, great. And Paula, Chair and the committee, thank you so much for the opportunity to come along this morning. Firstly, I have a wee dog, quite a big dog, sitting behind me here. So if the postman arrives and just starts barking, I apologise in advance. So in relation to our sector, you know, obviously it's been at the heart of the response to COVID-19, you know, coming together to deliver services, and the response has been nothing short of incredible. It has brought considerable hardship. It has affected some people and communities disproportionately, and the same is true of our sector. You know, the sector is diverse and the crisis has impacted on our members differently. So for those organisations who raise their income through a social enterprise model or through the community fundraising, their business model, their income model has effectively crumbled. So some of those charities have been able to access financial support. However, there are still a high number that haven't been able to, and it is because of the criteria, and I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to talk about that. For those who have been able to access support, it has provided some relief. However, when you're looking at the scale of their losses, it doesn't touch the sides in terms of mitigating against the scale of income that they have lost. You know, you're looking at hundreds of thousands, in some cases millions worth of pounds of losses. So although a £75,000 grant is welcome, it's much short of what is actually needed. So in terms of the short-term support, we need the COVID charity fund to reopen as soon as possible, and Mark's point is spot on in terms of the timing of this. So myself, along with NICFA and RCN, had met with the Minister, I think it was 3 weeks ago, who had given a commitment to reopen this fund. You know, the £6.8 million underspend has been with the department since September. So the fact that the fund's going to be reopened this side of Christmas is welcome. I am slightly disappointed that the pre-application information is going to be this side of Christmas, with the fund opening next year. Again, we have a really short window, and we have until March 2021 to get this money spent. And in addition to the 6.8 million, we also have an additional £5 million, which was announced last week from the Department of Finance. And again, it's our understanding that this money has to be spent by March 2021. So the sense of urgency to get this fund opened sooner rather than later, and ideally, although the pre-application information is being made available this side of Christmas, if there's any possibility of opening it in December rather than waiting to January, I would absolutely encourage that. On a separate but related point, I think it is also important to highlight, we have seen the Department of Finance respond directly to support the hospice movement in Northern Ireland. Millions are being allocated to support these frontline, much needed critical service, and it's a great example of being able to respond and to support those critical services. So, you know, DOF are leading by example here. So is there an opportunity to look at a similar model of equitable support for other health and social care charities that are providing life-saving services and find themselves in a similar positions? It's not something that I have raised with the Department of Communities, but I thought it was worthy of highlighting to you today. I also want to highlight the role of Furlough. It's been a lifeline of support for many in the sector. But it raises challenges in that, and we spoke about this when I raised it with the committee previously, it's forcing charities to step staff down at exactly the time when we need them to step up. Now, the Minister did give a commitment to write to Conor Murphy to ask him on behalf of the Executive to the Chancellor calling for a special exemption. Now, I heard this morning that that letter is due to be sent today. So again, this is the sense of urgency to get that letter, and whatever support the Communities Committee can offer as well, to ask for a special exemption, which in the short term could be a game changer for so many of our members. So in addition to the support in the short term, I also want to highlight the importance of looking to the longer term. And I think there's a real opportunity here to reset the relationship between the sector and government. So as well as the vast societal challenges that charities are responding to, charities and social enterprises, large and small, across our region here, have faced such an avalanche of multifaceted demands all at once. So there's the short-term issues and challenges that we need to address, but there's also the longer term and the need to provide more infrastructure support as well. So on that note, I'm going to hand over to Sarah from Children's Heartbeat Trust.
Good morning, members. Thanks so much for the opportunity to present to you this morning. So my name is Sarah Quinlan. I'm the Chief Exec with the Children's Heartbeat Trust, and we are a small Northern Irish-based charity that provides practical, emotional and financial support to children and young people living with congenital heart disease and their families. You might know this, but congenital heart disease is the most common birth defect in Northern Ireland, and there are over 200 babies born each year here with a congenital heart defect. And each year, we as a charity provide a wide range of support services to these families, including financial support when they have to travel to England or the Republic of Ireland for their child's surgery or treatment, parent accommodation at the Children's Hospital in Belfast, counselling, youth programmes, local groups, family events and respite stays. And we provide these services to over 500 families in Northern Ireland each year. We also fund pioneering research and we advocate for these vulnerable children and their families. So in reality, the core of our income model is community fundraising. We receive no government support and we have no dependence on the public purse. COVID-19 has hit us really hard. Community fundraising, as we know it, has virtually disappeared. People are no longer able to gather inside or outside in any large capacity. And corporate support has also vanished as businesses focus on their own survival and keeping funds in-house, basically. So the impact of COVID-19 is that we have lost a huge level of income for a small charity like us. We are 33% down on what we had brought in at this stage last year. And last year we brought in around £500,000. This year we are hopeful for £250,000, which represents a 50% loss of income. With paring back our services and our outgoings to core and the bare minimum, really, this is leaving us in the best instance in a deficit position in the region of £100,000 this financial year. So we didn't meet the criteria to access the previous funding round, which is really frustrating for us because it was set out as a loss of income support. And as evidence, our loss of income is huge for us. And yet, because we did have reserves, we were unable to access the support. It appears that we are being penalised for exercising good governance, which is incredibly frustrating. So we are now in our reserves and we have had no financial support from the government, except for the furlough scheme, which, as Nora has already referenced, we're really grateful for it. But in order to access that, we've also had to furlough staff who are delivering the key services that our families rely on. So we're now dealing with this detrimental financial impacts of COVID-19 on our income streams at a time when, conversely, our services are facing increased demands from the families we support. For example, last calendar year, we provided financial support to 171 families travelling for their child's heart surgery or treatment. This year, to date already, we've supported 202 families. That's an increase of 31 families. Last year, our Clark Bear Christmas Appeal, which supports heart families in hardship with food and toy parcels, supported 42 families and 85 children. This year, we have 56 families and 149 children on our books. They tell us of the bleak Christmas that they are facing, mainly due to the impact of COVID-19 on their own family incomes. And these are families who were maybe just scraping by before the pandemic, who now find themselves really, really struggling to make ends meet. And we know the services that we provide are life-changing and have a long-term impact on a family's approach through this life-limiting condition and their well-being in learning how to live with it. And we know this because they tell us this current challenging environment isn't going to stop us continuing our work for these families. However, the increased demand on our services, coupled with the huge loss of income, will have an increasingly devastating impact on our ability to deliver for this vulnerable group. Short term, what we need is support from the government to enable our valuable work to continue, and that of other charities who find themselves in a similar position to us. The COVID fund needs to reopen promptly. Obviously, they're talking about it now, but I can only reiterate how prompt this fund needs to reopen. I mean, we've been waiting on it to reopen for months. It's critical that it reopens as soon as possible, and it's also crucial that the criteria is considered and it's changed, basically. We need the criteria to look at loss of income and annual deficit in income as opposed to reserves. And I ask this because we would like to be treated with the same consideration as the business community, whose grant funding was not based on reserves, but rather on the direct impact of COVID-19. Given third sector organisations like ours are often the cornerstone of support provisions for vulnerable communities across Northern Ireland, and in doing so create massive savings for the government, this support is not only necessary, but it's entirely fit and proper. Thank you.
Over to myself now, Barry Mccauley from Stroke Association Northern Ireland. So I'm coming from a sort of an example of a UK charity, and I know a lot of my counterparts who are country directors in other UK charities are facing the same issues as we are in Stroke Association. So we provide a myriad of services across the country to stroke survivors. We have emotional support services, general support services, financial support, and speech and language therapy services for people who have lost their speech after a stroke. So a whole rehabilitation, gambit of services, which are all under threat, sadly. From the 1st of April, I really fear for the services due to COVID and what's happened. A lot of the issues similar to what Sarah has mentioned there. We have lost, in Northern Ireland, we have lost £125,000 this year of our own direct fundraising. That's because of all the events cancelled and the corporate sponsorship going down, etc. But we've also lost a further 100 grand through the UK system. Our organisation has lost £6 million this year. So the grant that I get from London, literally, to support our services is going to be reduced by 100 grand from the 1st of April because we're not going to replace this income. So there's a loss roughly this year, 225,000, and you don't need to be a genius to work out what that means. That is going to be staff, and it's going to be frontline staff, sadly. Support to date, exactly the same as Sarah. Furlough scheme, absolutely grateful for that, and we couldn't have done without that. But kind of, if I'm honest, it's just prolonging the agony for us. We got no money from the department's fund, and we were in that bracket that Mark mentioned earlier. We just saw the eligibility criteria and thought there was no point in putting a bid in because it mentioned reserves and the impending closure. So we're a UK charity. We have reserves in London. They would be counted, and we're not closing. The Stroke Association will not close. Going to face extreme challenges, but it won't close. So we were ruled out immediately for that. Sadly, we were also ruled out about 3 other programmes that the Community Foundation had sourced money for grants. Again, they saw us as a UK charity with an income threshold way above their 500 grand. Yet we as Northern Ireland Stroke Association are under 500 grand, and we should have been deemed like that. But again, bureaucracy and accounts and stuff rule us out of everything. So we basically have got nothing, and yet we've lost 225 grand. You'll not be surprised to hear our demand for our services, just like Sarah's, has gone up. People are having strokes during COVID. People are recovering from strokes. They're not having rehab. The rehab that they would have got. People weren't going to hospital at the height of the last phase, and the backlog of issues, emotional support issues, mental health caused by that, it just means our services are busier than ever before, yet they're all now under threat because of the loss of income. I think short term, I would back up everything that Sarah mentioned and that CO3 mentioned there about the monies now that need to be released. But for us, that's short term, and all that will do will help us out for the next 6 months or whatever. For me, the biggest issue I have is the future contracts that we have with the Department of Health, and a lot of the health and social care charities are in the same boat. For some reason in Northern Ireland, we only get around 50-60% of these contracts, and the charities subsidise the rest of the services with their own money. We no longer have that money to subsidise. So in the stroke sector, ourselves and Chest, Heart and Stroke deliver commissioned services, but we get around 50-60%. This is unsustainable. From the 1st of April, we won't be able to deliver the contract, sadly. And to me, that's something that really just needs to be fixed long term. You know, you can't imagine the Department of Health or the Trust going into a private relationship and giving someone 50-60% of a contract. I mean, it's unbelievable that that happens. Sadly, it's been just something systemic in Northern Ireland that appears to be normal practice. And that the Trust expect, oh, but sure, you can do your fundraising, or sure, you've got money from London, you'll make that up. Sadly, we can't anymore. And on the 1st of April, well, in January, I'll be making 10 of my, I'll be starting consultations with 10 of my direct service staff. That's our whole service gone, unless there's some sort of rescue package, or the contracts become 100% rather than 50-60%. So it's as simple as that, and I'm not being dramatic about this. That is what's going to happen. We will not close as an organisation. We will continue then as a lobbying campaign and organisation, but our staff of 25 will go down to about 12. And that's what I'm preparing for in the new year. So it's quite drastic, and I'm extremely frustrated at not being able to get any government support because we're a UK charity. We're deemed to have resources. We're deemed to have all this money from London, which doesn't exist. And that's the big frustration. And I do have a number of peers in the UK charity as country directors in Northern Ireland who have the same issues. Sadly, that's a bit of a bleak picture from us.
Okay, Barry, thank you. Thank you, Nora, and thank you, Sarah. Just to kick off, I know I sat in the Health Committee, as you all know. I sat in the Health Committee for a number of years, and I knew then of the reliance that we had on our third sector when it came to delivering services and meeting essential need within our communities when it came to health. And I know that going forward, when we, post-pandemic, there will be an even greater over-reliance on your sector, because we know that many within that health sector have suffered greatly because of appointments being cancelled, surgeries being cancelled. People are living in an awful lot of pain. They're requiring that help, and that help is coming primarily from the third sector and no one else. You had mentioned earlier, I know, Nora, you had mentioned that you had met with the Minister a few weeks, our Minister, with Minister for Communities a few weeks ago, and I'll ask you something specific on that in a minute, but I want to know, have you met with the Health Minister? Because you're quite right about the contracts. I remember that from many years going back as well, and the difficulties around that, and how you were subsidising those contracts in order to provide that absolutely essential service to, as I say, to those many people in distress, in pain, whether that's through mental health or physical health. So just if you can answer that quickly, just have you had that meeting with the Health Minister yet? Can't hear you, Nora.
So can you hear me now?
I can hear you now, go ahead.
Yeah, so representatives of the Health and Social Care Special Interest Group that we have did meet with the Health Minister, and we did bring up the broad issue of funding, and full cost recovery was discussed within that. It is important to highlight that although this is a big concern within the Department of Health, there's other government departments as well that are issuing contracts which are not full cost recovery as well. I did raise it with the Department for Communities Minister when we met, I think it was 3 weeks ago, and she had given a commitment to write to her executive colleagues on this issue, but what she had asked for was a stronger evidence base of examples of where this was the case. So Barry provides a really clear example. There's lots of others as well. So what we have done is we're in the process of, we've issued a survey to our members, and we're collecting a stronger evidence base on what full cost recovery looks like, or what it doesn't look like, for a range of contracts, not just within the Department of Health, but across a range of other government departments as well. So if it would be appropriate, when we're in a position, I would share those findings with the committee.
No, sorry, Mary, go ahead.
Just to say, we as the Stoke sector, myself and my counterpart in CS Tartan Stoke, did meet the Minister directly about this about 3 weeks ago. And obviously the Minister has other priorities, and if I'm honest, we didn't hold much hope out on it. So we feel we need to keep lobbying on it.
No, absolutely, because I can see that, as I said, there will be an even more reliance on your sector in the weeks, months, and possibly even years ahead. You provide a service that the health service cannot physically provide. So absolutely essential. No, and I think the committee, I'm just speaking here, I'm sure they'll agree, would be more than happy to write to all of those other departments. I know it's not just health, there are others. And I could think of, with justice as well, there's many of good work done in the third sector there also, and others as well. So just to come back then to the meeting with Minister Mccauley, Nora, you'd said about that meeting 3 weeks ago, which is good, and I'm glad that took place. And I know that criteria, Sarah had mentioned criteria. Did you have to speak to her about the criteria and how that criteria was phrasing out some of those charities?
Yeah, the criteria wasn't discussed specifically in that meeting, but a meeting, I think it was the week before, and department officials had met with a range of different representatives, including myself, around what the criteria should consider. I think we're all learning as we go through this as well, and there is a recognition that it was too restrictive, and that you had to have losses as a direct result of COVID-19, and that you weren't able to recover those losses by the end of September. So my understanding is that they're going to have criteria so that organisations such as
Sorry, Nora,
can you hear me?
You're coming in and out there with us, so you are a wee bit. It's not very clear.
What I may do is turn my camera off just to give me a bit more bandwidth.
That would do. That's great. No problem.
The joys of rural broadband.
Oh, I know.
We didn't discuss the criteria specifically at that meeting. What the Minister had given an assurance was that the fund would open this side of Christmas. I did meet with officials alongside other representatives from the broader sector a couple of weeks before, and the issue of the criteria was discussed at that. And we did highlight the importance of having a broader set of criteria so that organisations such as Children's Heartbeat Trust and the Stroke Association would be eligible moving forward. When you're looking at such dramatic losses, it does seem deeply unfair that if you do have reserves, which potentially are being ring-fenced for essential services, or that you're part of a UK-wide structure, there is this perception that somehow you'll get the resources through that, when we simply know that that's not the case. So I'm hopeful that the department have learned from that, and that we will have a wide set of criteria which will enable a wide range of charities to be able to access support that haven't been able to. There's also the question as well that although some of our members have been able to access support, it's not enough. So there has to be the opportunity as well for those organisations that have been able to access support, that have the ability to reapply as well. So you have the 6.8 million, but you also have an additional £5 million, which the Department of Finance announced last week. The real concern is that the criteria obviously has to be broad enough so that all charities impacted get the support, and that it's issued as soon as possible. And although they're talking about a pre-application stage this side of Christmas, if there's any way to push that to open the actual funding process this side, it would just buy members a few extra weeks.
No, I absolutely get that, because when you think that the last tranche of funding got closed in August, and you're looking at 5 months then down the line for the next tranche of funding, it really isn't good enough for it to help, because for many of you it's survival. It's not even just to tick yourselves over. I just wanted to ask around that about the first tranche that you received. How quickly then was the money then distributed, Nora, once the application process closed?
Yeah, it was, and we were one of the recipients of that fund, and grateful for that support. And the application process was pretty straightforward, and the turnaround time was a matter of weeks. So again, you know, it was pretty efficient, and that was done through the National Lottery Community Fund. So it's our hope and expectation that we would have a similar straightforward process, which would allow, although applications close at the end of January, if there's a possibility, if you can get your application in earlier, that potentially then that the fund would be awarded before the closing date. My expectation is that they're going to be oversubscribed, but hopefully then that will present an evidence base that more financial support will be needed in the new financial year.
Okay, thanks for that, Nora. Just finally, I mean, we know because we've heard from various charities, both as a committee and as individuals, about the difficulties with many charities that didn't apply, as Mark said earlier, because of their reserves. But then when we talk about those UK-based charities, as Barry was talking about, I mean, they're in an even more difficult position. And I know part of that reason, from what I've been led to believe, is that they're not registered as Northern Ireland charities, so that knocks them out of quite a lot of funding. So it's just on that issue, Barry, how do we overcome that? Because we see you, I mean, you Stroke Association was part of my all-party group that I ran for a number of years here, and I seen you very much as a Northern Ireland charity that worked for the people of Northern Ireland. So how do we overcome that, or what can the committee do to try and assist with that?
Yeah, well, we're working at the minute with the Community Foundation to try and see what we can produce to almost prove that we are a Northern Ireland charity. They see our accounts that we produce to them as a big UK account, you know, with millions of pounds covering 4 countries, and they just see a little addendum of Northern Ireland, and they just refuse to accept us as a Northern Ireland entity in its own right. So we're working with them to see what they want, and then we're working with our accountants to actually produce audit accounts for the Northern Ireland operation. So I'm hoping that will help us for those Community Foundation grants. As for the DFC grant, I'm hoping the likes of that will help us again. It's just evidence. I mean, although we are part of the UK organisation, you're right, Paula, I'm the director for Northern Ireland and kind of run it like the organisation in Northern Ireland. We obviously have the links and a corporate strategy, but we are Northern Ireland, and any money we raise stays in Northern Ireland, and it is a Northern Ireland charity. But it just bureaucratically, it's not meeting these criteria. So I think if I can get the Northern Ireland accounts issue sorted, that will help. But it's almost the funder needs to accept the massive amount of resource that is put into the third sector in Northern Ireland by UK charities, and it's not being accepted at the minute. Sadly, I don't think it's any intended. It's an unintended consequence.
If I could come in as well.
Go ahead.
But just in relation to UK-wide charities being locked out of the scheme, I do know a number of UK-wide charities that are looking to register through the Charity Commission in Northern Ireland here. And with one member that had put in their application 7 years ago, and they're still waiting for an outcome. And again, they're locked out of the fund because they're stuck in a process which sits outside of their control. So there may be a role for the committee, if you think it's appropriate, to reach out to the Charity Commission to see if there's any way of addressing the backlog in registrations.
That is truly shocking, Nora, to hear that there is a charity that has been waiting 7 years. Absolutely shocking. I think that is, I think the committee will be more than happy to run with that one as well. I know it said it finished. If just one more tiny thing, and maybe Barry will know this as well. I don't know if Stroke Association have any charity shops. I know that there are many. I had the great pleasure of going to the Chest, Heart and Stroke one, the British Heart Foundation one in Castle Street for their opening a couple of years ago. It was around Christmas time, and I know that brings in an income, but I also know that also provides as well for so many people as well. Did they receive any funding as retail units during COVID? Do you know? It's just you maybe don't know, but just asking.
Yeah, we don't, Stroke Association don't have the British Heart Foundation or the big in the cardiovascular world or the big provider of that. And Nora, you might be of some of our colleagues, I'm not sure what the situation is.
So a number of members that do have retail outlets and they have been successful in receiving a grant. It differs between each region though. So in Scotland and Wales, if you had multiple retail units, then you got a grant for each of those. In Northern Ireland, the allocation was just for one unit. So it wasn't equitable, and it was of great frustration. To a great number of members in that space. So I was speaking to Michelle from Bernardo's earlier this week, and she was highlighting that they've lost over £1 million in their charity shops alone. And it's a separate but related point. We've written to, I've reached out to the Department for the Economy and the Department of Finance about this retail voucher scheme, making sure that the voucher scheme that's being allocated to families, that it also can be spent in charity shops and high street charity shops. Again, that could be a good source of income for those that have lost, hundreds of thousands, millions of pounds worth through the retail source of income.
Okay, thanks, Dora. I think then again that's another a letter from the committee then through to Economy and Finance, and just asking for them to clarify that as well, and also the letter to the Chancellor of the Exchequer. I think we wrote before on your behalf, so I would, with the committee again, will be more than happy to do that. Okay, members, that's me finished for now. I have Robin, and then I have Kelly, and then I have Mark.
Happy enough the Deputy Chair goes ahead, Chair, first. You've asked most of my questions.
Okay, sorry. Go ahead, Kelly.
As long as you let me come back.
Yeah, I will.
Thank you very much, Nora, Sarah and Barry. I'll declare an interest at this stage, having worked in the sector for almost 20 years before I became an MLA. One of the frustrations that I have is this inability of many government departments to understand what full cost recovery is and the necessity of it, and that contracts and grants are offered with this expectation that charities will basically subsidise government work. I'm just wondering, on the full cost recovery, have you had any discussions with Maura Doherty, who is supposed to be working on the Concordat, the update of the Concordat agreement, to ensure as part of that Concordat agreement it's built in from the executive an agreement that all provision of grants or funding will be done on a full cost recovery basis?
Yeah, Maura was on the call with the Minister 3 weeks ago, so she was privy to that conversation and recognises that we're going to be following up with survey results. I've also reached out to Anne-Marie McClure, who's the chair of the Joint Forum as well, for their support, because I think, as Barry said earlier, it's been a systemic issue, and unfortunately we're in a completely different financial environment, so we just can't continue unless we operate with a full cost recovery model moving forward. So there's a real opportunity here to reset the relationship we have with government, and as part of that, full cost recovery has to be central.
We know in the past that the Welsh Assembly government took a very different way to doing procurement and did a proactive method where they sought out social enterprises. And to be honest, I see a lot of charities in the work that you do, although you may not call yourself a social enterprise, the fact that you're adding income through fundraising is basically social enterprise work. I'm just wondering, has there been any discussions with the Minister, the Department, or even the Department of Finance about that review of procurement to ensure then that your organisations are on the same footing as every other business that gets a grant from government?
Yeah, and ultimately this does come down to commissioning, and how contracts are commissioned. So from our perspective in CO3, the cornerstone of this campaign will be survey results, and then from there we'll be connecting with the Department for Communities and also with the Department of Finance, with the view that every government department, an arm's length government department, then operates a model of full cost recovery, because commissioning is key. You're absolutely spot on, Kelly.
I'm just thinking as well about that, the charity business model at the moment. Because you have been asked to use reserves, which you have rightly said, reserves are built and are required to be built on known liabilities. So it's for redundancies, it's for 3 months running costs should funding fail. Because you've had to use those reserves, how many charities in Northern Ireland are now at risk of no longer being viable companies because their reserves have been depleted?
It's obviously very difficult to give you an accurate picture on that. All I can go is feedback I'm getting from members here saying that on average, they would hold between 3 to 6 months reserves. Some are in a better position, which has been a lifesaver for them through the COVID crisis. The reality is that if they have to keep relying on their reserves with the model of reduced income, then of course their sustainability is at question. I can't give you a number, and I can't give you a time frame, but it's a huge challenge. And the reality is, there has been huge financial challenges the sector has experienced over years of funding cuts. COVID-19 has just put a big highlighter pen and dug us into probably a bigger financial hole sooner rather than later. So I think over the course of the next year, we are going to see some charities having to close because they're no longer sustainable, unless there is more intervention and more support. So it's the short-term and the longer-term support that we need.
Absolutely. I would love to see a review, a holistic review of the income model. As you say, the income model has collapsed at this stage, and it would be good to have that reflection with organisations, charities across Northern Ireland as to what would be next. If there's another pandemic like this that causes the fall and the collapse in fundraising, we can't keep going the way that we're going. But I'm just wondering as well, oftentimes in government departments, people see reserves pot as this enormous amount of money. Now, I worked in transport charities, and to have to save up on a straight line depreciation to replace a bus meant that there was thousands sitting in a bank account, but it was there for a particular reason. But there seemed to be an absolute lack of understanding, not in procurement, but actually in the government departments with the civil servants themselves, as to why that reserve was there and what it's for. And then it meant when they were buying services, they were assuming that they should put into the contract that you need to use your reserves to back up what they're doing. Do you know, or is there any way that your sector can almost train those civil servants to understand the business model for a charity? Because I'm very worried that they'll be buying services without actually making that contract, fit with the companies that they're trying to buy from.
Yeah, and I suppose it's part of the reset, and it's about our civil servants understanding our world and the challenges on the particular models that we have, and at the minute it does feel very bureaucratic, and it does feel very computer says no. So sometimes there is a basic lack of understanding on why we have reserves, what they're there to serve, and the level of financial support that's actually needed to run a charity effectively. So there's an opportunity here to reset that relationship, and as part of that, there has to be an education piece, and I think there has to be a rebalance as well of the power structures between funder and funded.
Can I just come in there? You mentioned Wales there earlier. I just anecdotally, I happen to be covering the director role in Wales for the last 6 months. The contracts are 115%, all of them. 100% cost recovery plus 15% to cover the charity's overheads. That's right across the board, £1 million worth of contracts. And then I have the Northern Ireland accounts looking at me, and it's just, I can't understand it. It's the same in England as well. I'm not as close to it, but across England, we get full cost recovery on £10 million worth of contracts. Yet in Northern Ireland, we're struggling to get 50 and 60. So there's a real issue.
Is there an issue about using social return on investment? Because in Wales, as you say, they buy a service from a charity, but in Northern Ireland, they use the measurement tool of social return on investment, which is quite nice. It says for every pound the public money spends, you're getting X amount of pounds back. But when you do that, it means then that funders are looking at no more than 75%, 85% funding for a service, which means then that you're actually subsidising the health service, you're subsidising all of them. Yeah. Just my final question then is, where did it go? The department has said it cannot open the funding in this application round in December. Have they told you why?
No, and to be honest, this is the first time that I've heard that. My understanding when I met with the Minister was that the fund would open this side of Christmas.
Right, okay. Thank you very much.
Something then that we can clarify as well.
Yeah.
You've given us a list here of things you have after this meeting, a list of letters, which is good, that's good. Okay, Mark, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thanks to Nora, Barry, and Sarah for the presentation. The questions I was going to ask that you didn't manage to, Chair, Kelly kind of gazumped me on there. I was just wondering in terms of the reserves issue, which has knocked people out of qualifying for assistance thus far, and Kelly touched on it there. It was, I suppose, with reduced income, with the threat that looming, and if not imminent, threat of redundancies. Do you know, what sort of tightrope are charities walking there? Do you know, as regards eating into the reserves and decreasing their viability, and I suppose that their duty, legal and moral, that they no doubt feel to their employees? Just in terms of the issues that were raised, obviously you're here, you're representative of a sector, but there are many charities of varying shapes and sizes. But the figures that we were hearing today, I mean, we were talking about eye-watering amounts of money being lost, but it is much more than money, as we all know. You know, the impact on services and desperate service users in need of support is really under threat here and struggling greatly. So, I mean, the question would have to be, if no one's going to pick up the tab here to help the charities, is anyone going to pick up the slack in terms of government departments? And I think that's something that you'd asked, Chair, had there been any engagement with the Health Minister. I think that's something that we should be maybe putting to Health, if not the wider executive, because it is a massive issue that has potentially massive negative repercussions right across society.
Yeah, and the reality is, you know, we've already seen a reduction in services as part of a cost-cutting exercise in order to protect dwindling reserves. You're also seeing cost-cutting through redundancies, and we have a number of members that have started that redundancy process, and the feedback they're sharing with me is that this is the first of potentially a couple of round of redundancies that we're going to have to do unless our financial position changes, and changes sooner rather than later. And the reality is, you know, we'll be living with restrictions for the foreseeable future. Hopefully, you know, the vaccine offers some hope for next year, but it'll be much later in the year. So for those that do have, you know, 6+ months reserves, you know, they're going through them at a rate of naught. And, you know, in lots of cases, and maybe Sarah can touch better on this, you know, those reserves were set up or were built for specific services that that charity was hoping to invest in, which now is being utilised for overhead costs.
Yeah, just to pick up on that, Nora, I mean, we have healthy reserves because we've worked really, really hard to create this buffer for future services we know coming down the line. We are leading and pioneering research around telemedicine in the world, and we're trying to develop that, support that for paediatric cardiology. But that is an area which has transformed some of the patient care over COVID-19 in terms of telemedicine and virtual correspondence with patients in the hospital. So that is being adapted across other services, other health services, and has originated with paediatric cardiology and with our support. And then also we have reserves. The New Children's Hospital is online, and you know, we know that we've been in discussions with the management that we're going to be asked to support the paediatric cardiology unit within that. We part funded the Children's Heart Centre, and to make that a family and patient friendly environment, and not to ease the stress of waiting long times on appointments, and also the various examinations that children have to go under whenever you're going through that. And that's the same as other children's charities that work with the hospital. We know that we are going to be asked to support the New Children's Hospital as well, and that's what we have reserves for. We don't have reserves just sitting there lounging around. You know, they're all for a purpose, and they're all things that the charities work to in terms of trying to plan for the future and to be sustainable and to be in a position to support projects whenever they arise. So it is just incredibly frustrating from our perspective that is being used against us whenever we're constantly being told as a third sector to be more sustainable, to have good governance, and also, you know, as I've shown today, our income and our deficit this year is going to be enormous. And the practical impact of that is services for children, young people and families. And talking about redundancies, we're a tiny team. If I am forced down the road of making redundancies, we are losing services, and that's the bottom line.
Okay, thanks, Nora. And just finally, Chair, I know we have a list, a list of letters to write there. We just propose, however, that when we're writing to the Minister requesting, which I presume we will be, the earlier opening of this fund, that we also, ask her to explore possibilities around flexibilities around spend, given how close we are to the end of the financial year. But if you think back to the start of the pandemic, which was actually during the last financial year, believe it or not, there were flexibilities. There was flexibility afforded to the community and voluntary sector, around funding that they had to have spent by the end of March, but I think a solution was able to be found there, and it's just if there's any possibility that we can be creative around this, just to get the biggest bang for our buck and ensure that charities are able to make the best of the money that they do get, and hopefully they all do get this much needed support.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Absolutely spot on. If nobody else wants to come in, let Robin, you want to come back?
Yeah, it's just a simple question, Chair. Maybe a bit more of clarity from Barry and indeed from Sarah. Barry, am I right in what I think I heard you say, that you read the criteria that was outlined, and having read the criteria, you decided that it wasn't worthwhile making an application because you felt you weren't meeting the criteria?
Exactly. We just saw no purpose in us wasting time on the application. It strictly said, I can't remember the exact wordings, but it was if you have reserves of X, Y, and Z, or if you're not at risk of imminent closure, you're not eligible. So we read that and we just didn't put it in. What was the point in us wasting days of an application which was clearly not going to go through?
And in the case of Sarah, you actually made, am I right, Sarah? You made an application and were turned down?
No, sorry, we were in the same position as Barry. It was actually, I'm just back from maternity leave, so it was my interim who actually took advice. I think she spoke to a few people within the department as well, just to see, I suppose how the criteria was set up and whether there was really value in applying for it. And again, because of our reserves, the feedback was no. And so again, in the same position as Barry, you're under a lot of pressure, and time is very valuable whenever your small team is working in this COVID-19 environment. So the decision was made that the criteria wasn't fit for us.
Of course. You may have been able to hear a discussion before we came to you this morning, but we have a letter indicating that of 645 applicants for the scheme, 501 were eligible, is the word used. Eligible charities were supported, so 144 charities did not receive support under the scheme. Would you be aware of any of those charities who were turned down? Probably an unfair question.
Yeah, I am aware of a number that did apply and weren't successful. And to be honest, they submitted the application knowing that they may be turned down because of the strict criteria. And I suppose, to be fair to the department, they were responding to what they felt was suitable at that time. We now know that the criteria needs to be much broader to support a wide range of charities to reflect their particular circumstances. So for those that had applied and weren't successful, of course they were disappointed and frustrated, but it's because the criteria was so strict. And from what I recall, it was reserves that knocked them out.
So, okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you for the group coming to see us.
Okay, thanks, Robin. Okay, I think that's sorry, Kelly, you wanted to come back as well, didn't you?
I was just going to add on, Chair, if we could, if we're writing to the department, as Mark has suggested, could we add in that for this round of funding that's coming out, that they review the criteria with an aim to removing the reserve balance? Because at the end of the day, Sarah and charities like hers have spent what reserve they can. There is no more reserves left. So for the department to keep on using reserves as a way to exclude is no longer relevant.
Absolutely.
Chair, just before, maybe I could ask, would it be in order, Chair, for the representatives to actually write to you indicating what they think would be appropriate criteria given the circumstances? Would that be in order, Chair?
Yeah, I think that would be useful if you are in agreement with that. It would help. It would help us in our questioning and our and what we think is appropriate. You're the best people to answer that question, not us. Yeah, are you happy enough with that, Nora?
Sorry, I missed that. Was
Robin?
it asking for our feedback on what the criteria should include?
Yeah, what it should be, because you know your members, you know them best, you know what they absolutely need. So I think that's a good point that Robin made. We don't know what that is, only you know that. Mm-hmm. So if you can feed that back to the committee, Nora, that would be great.
Yeah, sure. I would hope at this stage, yes, I certainly will. And I do have had conversations with the department, and I know they have engaged with the wide range of sector leaders on this, but yeah, happy to provide that feedback. On a more positive note, I think it is important to highlight there are a few green shoots out there, where dormant accounts funding is going to be open this side of Christmas, which is great news. And as I understand it, that's going to be a multi-year fund which will support the infrastructure and the longer term support of the sector as well. So there are a wide range of challenges out there, and it's going to be a difficult 12 to 24 month period for the sector, and we do need much more support both in the short term and the longer term. But it is welcome news that dormant is literally just a couple of weeks away now from opening.
That's no problem, Nora. And just Robin has reminded me here that criteria question that we have asked of you, that's probably would be a matter of urgency to get that through sooner rather than later. We will be getting various briefings from the department and the minister in the next few weeks ahead, so it would be handy to have that information so that we can forward it on as well. I think that everybody has said what they needed to say. Can I thank you very much? We have a list a mile long. I have a few things written down here, so I'm just going to rhyme them off, and then members or yourselves can jump in if I've missed something. The first thing is to do with the contracts and the full cost recovery. I think we need to write to all departments on that, because I know that all departments have a responsibility there. Then the Chancellor of the Exchequer around the special exemption with the furlough, and then I also have the Charity Commission, because that was horrifying that someone's waiting 7 years. I also have then the Economy and the Finance Ministers to do with the vouchers, if they can clarify that as well. And then yes, writing to the Minister to ask about opening the fund earlier and being a bit more flexible within that fund as well. Okay, members, if I've forgotten one, will you tell me now?
I was going to ask if we can write to the department to ask what's happening with the Concordat agreement, because that is the executive signed agreement with the charity sector. Okay. And if full cost recovery is in that, then all departments should be working to that. Okay. And also, just there when Nora mentioned it, dormant accounts, is that going to be a mutually exclusive fund that then may knock people out of this money that's coming out?
No. Completely separate, Kelly. So that's been administered through the National Lottery. It's money that came down from the Department of Finance. So it's separate, and it's looking at more long-term support and building sustainability for the sector. The COVID Charity Fund is very much about the immediate here now and dealing with losses of COVID. Dormant is different, and it is looking at the bigger picture, which we need to look at as well as the short term.
Okay, everybody, happy enough there. If I have forgotten anything, I'm sure the members will get in contact with the clerk anyway, just to remind them. So can I again thank you, Nora, Sarah and Barry. It was really good to see you again. Sorry it's under these circumstances and not under brighter circumstances, but good to see you and good to have you brief the committee, so thank you.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye, bye-bye. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Okay, members, we're just going to take a quick break before we have our first raise session, so I'm really looking forward to that. Are members okay then from what was suggested there in the end of that meeting before I close that part? Yeah? All happy? Okay. All right, I'll just take a quick break, members.
This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29.
Okay, members, we'll move on then to agenda item 6, which is a briefing by Raise on the Licensing Bill and Registration of Clubs Amendment Bill. So, members, you'll find 3 separate research papers in this, starting at page 43. And then can I offer a very warm welcome to the meeting? We have Eleanor Murphy, Ray Russell and Aidan Stennett, all from Assembly Research. So, Eleanor, I think you're going to brief us first, then we'll have Ray, and then Aidan after that. We'll do it, we'll let all 3 briefings, I think, members, if they're happy with that, we'll go ahead with the 3 briefings, and then we'll do questions after that. So, Eleanor, do you want to go ahead and start for us, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. Can you see my presentation okay?
Oh, can, yes.
Yeah, good stuff. So the purpose of our 3 research papers and presentations this morning is just to provide the committee with some contextual and background information and some of the evidence base before you begin your scrutiny of the bill. So Aidan's going to take you through some of the available data on the contribution of the hospitality industry to the economy in Northern Ireland, and we'll also touch upon some of the available data on the impact of COVID-19 on the sector. And obviously liquor licensing legislation has a very important public health element, so Ray is going to take you through some of the existing statistical evidence on alcohol use in Northern Ireland. So the purpose of my presentation is to provide you with some contextual information on some of the clauses of the bill. By now, the departmental officials have already briefed the committee on what those clauses are. So rather than just go through those again, I thought it might be helpful if we look at what happens in other jurisdictions and also identify some of the issues that the committee may want to start to consider. So I'm only going to go through about 5 of those clauses, because if I start to go through them all, we're here to midnight. So I can come back and brief the committee again if it finds this useful on some of the remaining clauses of the bill. So this is just your starter for 10, Chair. So we move on to clause 1. The removal of restrictions at Easter. So clause 1 of the bill proposes to remove all restrictions that currently apply over the Easter period for both on and off sales, and this will apply to both licensed premises and registered clubs. This is considerably more generous than the 2016 bill as introduced, as this only proposed to remove the restrictions in relation to Thursday before Easter Sunday only. So what happens in other jurisdictions? Well, up until a few years ago, the Republic of Ireland was the only jurisdiction that had restrictions on opening hours at Easter. So licensed premises were banned from opening on Good Friday. But you may well already be aware that this ban has since been removed. The lifting of the restrictions was contained within a private members' bill, which was subsequently enacted down south in January 2018. There are no similar restrictions on permitted opening hours at Easter in England, Wales and Scotland, but as we'll cover in the next few slides, they have a very different licensing regime and licensing infrastructure in comparison to Northern Ireland. So just some issues that you might want to consider. So obviously the committee will be going to be very interested in what the impact of the clause will actually be. So you might want to ask the department whether it has carried out or commissioned any analysis on the removal of restrictions in terms of the benefits to the hospitality industry and to tourism and to the economy in general. I should point out that Hospitality Ulster have carried out some analysis and estimated that in 2016, approximately £16 million in revenue was lost due to the restrictions. So you may want to consider exploring with them how they derived that figure and whether they have any updated figures that you could consider. So you may wish to explore with stakeholders the extent to which the proposals within Clause 1 will assist in addressing some of the financial challenges the sector has faced due to COVID-19. And lastly, the issue of Easter opening is obviously a very sensitive issue, and a sensitive balance has to be struck between promoting tourism and hospitality, but at the same time respecting the views and beliefs of faith-based groups and individuals. And so no doubt the committee will be hearing from some of the churches on that issue. So if we turn to clause 2, so clause 2 of the bill proposes to allow certain licensed premises an additional 1 hour late opening, that is to 2 a.m. on weekdays, 1 a.m. on Sundays, on a maximum of 104 occasions in any year. So clause 5 also is relevant because it proposes to increase drinking uptime by 30 minutes. So the latest certain licensed premises may be open to is 3 a.m. on weekdays and 2 a.m. on Sundays. So this is the previous 2016 bill also allowed for one additional 1 hour opening, but only for a maximum of 12 occasions in any year. So the 2020 bill is considerably more generous in that regard. So what happens in other jurisdictions? So in the Republic of Ireland, pubs and clubs can apply to the courts for something called a special exemption order, which allows licensed premises to open until 2:30 a.m. plus 30 minutes drinking uptime. So the bill will bring Northern Ireland into line with the maximum extended opening hours in the Republic of Ireland. However, special exemption orders in the south are a bit of a contentious issue. In order to obtain the licence, premises need to apply to the courts every few weeks, which also involves solicitors and quite costly fees, which is said to be particularly difficult for smaller premises to afford. So many in the licensing trade down south would like to see a reform of extended hours to either a yearly special exemption order, and some have called for the government to carry out a more fundamental review of the issue. And the government did indicate that it would carry out a consultation, and I'm still trying to find where exactly that is at the moment. So there are no nationally set permitted opening hours in England, Wales or Scotland. Licensing in these jurisdictions is devolved to the local authority level, so licensing decisions are not made by the courts or the police, although the police can have fairly considerable input in decision making. Licensing authorities in England, Wales and licensing boards in Scotland, their membership consists of local councils, and they make decisions on licensing and issues including permitted opening hours. Put it really simply, because it is a complex system, licensing premises themselves tend to determine what hours they wish to open, and this must be contained within an operating plan or operating schedule. The local licensing authority for that area will consider the plan within the context of its own individual local circumstances, such as how many bars and premises are already operating in that area, whether there's been incidents of antisocial behaviour. So one interesting thing you might want to note is the licensing infrastructure in other jurisdictions. In Scotland, local licensing boards are supported by something called local licensing forums. Each forum is a multidisciplinary body with membership comprising of the chief constable for the area, health trusts, social workers, young people, residents and licensees themselves. And the function of this forum is to advise and share intelligence with local licensing boards. So each licensing board also has a licensing standards officer or officers, depending on the size of the board area, whose role is to advise the board and licensed premises themselves in issues such as compliance with legislation. They can also provide dispute resolution and have the power to inspect premises. So the reason why I mentioned that is you may wish to consider having a closer look at our own regulatory infrastructure framework and whether it is sufficiently robust to make extended opening hours work smoothly. So I know Belfast City Council have done a lot of work into managing the nighttime economy, as with some other local council areas. So you might want to look at examples of best practice and how that can be rolled out across Northern Ireland. So some issues you might want to consider is what economic benefits does this have for licensed premises, again for tourism and the wider economy? What impact will it have on policing and health services, and what impact it will have on crime and alcohol consumption? So you might want to consider asking the department if they've done any research or analysis on this issue as part of the policy formulation process, and whether they're willing to share that with the committee. The bill's explanatory memorandum does explain that the department didn't carry out a regulatory impact assessment or rural needs assessment, And there's also very little information currently in the explanatory memorandum to do with the costings, like how much it's going to cost police. There's indications that it could impact on shift patterns, so the committee may want to follow up on that and see what data and economic data it can be provided with. So an interesting development you might want to keep an eye on is the recent announcement by the University of Stirling. They're about to embark on a 3-year, £1.1 million study on the impact of extended opening hours in Scotland, because some clubs in Scotland are now allowed to open in Edinburgh and Glasgow allowed to open to 3 and 4 a.m. And they're really going to be exploring what impact that has on the local nighttime economy, but also what impact it's having on health service, ambulance call-outs, and it's hoping that the research will be useful to policymakers throughout the UK. So extended drinking up times, previously mentioned, the proposal is to extend it from 30 minutes to 60 minutes. So in the Republic of Ireland, it's still 30 minutes. In Scotland, it's 15 minutes, but some licensing boards have made the decision to extend it to 30 minutes. And in England and Wales, there's no stipulation and guidance for a drinking up period at all. But the Home Office does provide guidance on dispersal. So that's like turning music down, changing the musical style, or providing food and non-alcoholic drinks. Some issues you might want to consider. The department may have conducted more in-depth research on the issue of drinking up time and dispersal. For example, examining drinking up time in other jurisdictions and how effective it is in terms of gradual dispersal and the impact that it has on alcohol consumption. You may wish to check if anything of that has been produced and whether they're willing to share it with you. You might want to ask how this is going to be rolled out. Will it be piloted first, or is it just going to be rolled out province-wide? So it's really to do with the timetable on this and the ability of the PSNI and other support services to be able to cope with that. And then the question perhaps you want to consider, will the stockpiling of drinks become an issue? And if that is, how do the licensing trade or the department have any solutions as to how this can be prevented? So the last clause I'll cover is major events. So obviously Northern Ireland has attracted some fantastic international events in recent years, but the department highlighted that organisers found that licensing laws were really restrictive, and therefore the department proposed to allow the bill proposes to allow the department to designate an event as a major event and then specify the permitted hours for that event, which might be outside current permitted opening hours. There's much more to this clause than what's on the screen. There's much more detail in the paper. So this is very much part of the licensing regime in other jurisdictions and has been for a considerable period of time. In Scotland, legislation permits the licensing board to make a determination to grant extensions for licensing hours for events of local and national significance. And also similar to the Northern Ireland Bill's proposals, this can apply to the whole of the licensing board area, to a small area within the licensing board area, or just to certain types of premises. There's a little bit of a difference in Scotland in terms of how it treats recurrent events. So things like the Edinburgh Fringe Festival and other recurrent events like that, it really expects that licensees will include their plans for permitted opening hours within their operating schedule. If a one-off event sort of occurs, there is some flexibility within the scheme that licensees can apply for their license to be varied, and this can be sped up in certain circumstances. So in England and Wales, the Secretary of State can, under the Licensing Act, make a licensing hours order, and they did so quite recently to celebrate the marriage of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. That's just an example, and I've also never thought I'd mention Meghan Markle in a research paper. But this extension was to 1 a.m. and really just benefited smaller pubs with earlier closing times. So some issues you might want to consider. The bill states the department may make an order if it considers that an event is to take place in Northern Ireland, which will attract significant interest. I hope I've interpreted that correctly. You can check with the department. If so, what happens if the event is significant to Northern Ireland but takes place outside Northern Ireland, such as local success in sporting events, international sporting events and cross-border sporting events. In England and Wales, it's also pretty much standard that a public consultation is published by the Secretary of State, and an impact assessment is published as well. So you might want to ask, does the department intend to do the same in terms of publishing a consultation and an impact assessment? And obviously this may not be necessary for all events. So the bill also provides the department must consult such persons as it considers appropriate in determining whether a major events order should be made. In terms of consultees, you might want to consider should there be mandatory consultees, such as the licensed premises in the area, PSNI, health trusts, local councils, tourism, ANI. And also you might want to consider what happens if a major disagreement takes place between the department and perhaps another department or a key stakeholder, and how that would be resolved. So that's basically that in a nutshell. I ran through that at some speed, but I'm happy to come back and chat to the committee again if you think that would be useful.
I would say that you will be back here many times with the committee, so don't kid yourself there. We'd be glad to have you back. I'm going to then move over to Ray and ask Ray then, would he give us his briefing as well?
Sure. Thank you for inviting me this morning, actually. In my brief presentation, rather than go through every page of it, I'll instead pull out some key statistics which you should be able to follow. The presentation will follow the same sequence as is in my paper. I will actually look at two aspects of alcohol consumption, namely alcohol and health and alcohol and crime. Okay, first of all, alcohol and health. I should really begin by making the point that information and statistics on adult drinking patterns here has been substantially reduced since around 2014. Before then, the Department of Health produced a publication called Adult Drinking Patterns every 3 to 5 years, but this was discontinued in 2014. It normally contained around 35 pages of data and text, while the current annual health survey contains less than half a page of statistics on alcohol. So there is a large gap there. Okay, alcohol consumption. Over 3/4 of adults, actually almost 4 out of 5, 79% here, drink alcohol. Now, their male and female patterns of consumption differ significantly. While almost 1 in 5 male drinkers drink on 3 or more days every week, that falls to 1 in 10 female drinkers. Overall, the proportion of adults who drink in Northern Ireland is broadly comparable to the other UK nations. Around 1 in 5 adults in the UK are teetotal, around 20%, and that's for all 4 UK nations. Okay, I'll look now a little bit at historic trends in alcohol consumption. In the UK as a whole, there was a significant rise in alcohol consumption after the end of the Second World War, from around 1945 up to the mid-90s. Since then, after that, consumption began to level off. And I should explain the reason. There are a number of factors which explain the large increase in alcohol consumption after the war years. One of them, it was thought to be largely due to the increasing affordability of alcohol from outlets such as supermarkets. There was also a change in behaviour in that there was, as I indicated, an increase in alcohol purchased from off licenses and a move away from licensed premises. So there's been that longer term change. More alcohol is consumed at home, less in licensed premises. Now, since around 2005, the overall amount of alcohol in the UK, including Northern Ireland, has begun to fall. This trend is especially pronounced in younger drinkers. I'll give you an example of that. Last evening, I was out for a walk in my local area. Now, there is a nice cream parlour situated right beside and off a licence. As I was walking past, I noticed that there was a large queue around the block to go in to the ice cream parlour, mostly young people, whereas the off licence was empty, which was interesting, I thought. Anyway, so also this fall in alcohol consumption among the young also applies to children, actually, as, for example, in the year 2000, over half of children aged between 11 and 16 reported ever having had a drink. By 2016, this proportion had fallen to under a third, so it's falling overall in the age group 16 to 64, actually. However, it is rising in older age groups. Those groups who are, people aged 65 and over, there is an upward trend in alcohol consumption. Also with women, not only men, actually, it's both men and women. One of the factors I suspect in that is that the baby boomers who began to drink in the 1970s, when they were perhaps in their late teens, early 20s, they are now reaching retirement age. So that cohort has just followed on, really, drinking from what they were doing when they were younger. So that's one aspect. The next item I'll look at is alcohol-related harm. Now, a major study which was commissioned in 2018 by the Public Health Agency England found, now they looked at literally hundreds of research articles from academic institutions, and they found that alcohol has been identified as a causal factor in over 200 health conditions. This includes various types of cancer, heart complaints, brain damage, fetal alcohol syndrome, etc., and strokes. Now, the harm caused by alcohol is largely dose dependent, i.e., the more you drink, the more harm it will cause you. Now, alcohol accounts for around 2% of all registered deaths in Northern Ireland, typically around 300 per year. So that's 2% of all deaths. Now, however, death rates in the most deprived areas of Northern Ireland are 3 times higher than in the least deprived. And in 2018, Northern Ireland had the second highest alcohol mortality of the 4 UK nations after Scotland, with England being the lowest. The Northern Ireland rate has actually been rising steadily since 2013. I should add that about 80% of alcohol-related deaths are linked to cirrhosis of the liver. That can actually take decades to manifest, and you can be completely symptom-free for many years until it hits you. So people who are dying from alcohol at this point, the damage may have began 40 years ago, or perhaps less than that. About hospital admissions, they have been climbing since between 2008 and 2013, but have since fallen back to 28 levels. Sorry, 2008, I should say. There are typically around 13,000 alcohol admissions here. Unfortunately, it's not possible to make any direct comparisons between Northern Ireland and, say, the Republic of Ireland or the other 3 UK nations, because all 4 of them use a different criteria for recording hospital admissions. So it's not really, they aren't directly comparable. Now, in 2014, it was estimated that alcohol misuse costs around 900 million per annum. These costs of alcohol abuse include health and social care, police and fire service, absenteeism from work, and premature mortality. Finally, I'll look here just a couple of statistics on alcohol and crime. Now, typically around 1 in 5 or 20,000 of all crimes in Northern Ireland are linked to alcohol. So that's 1 in 5, about 20,000. Now, violence with or without injury accounts for around 70%, or 3 out of 4 of all alcohol-motivated crime. And that's really at the end of my short presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray, and we'll have a few questions for you as well on some of those facts and figures and the lack of, suppose, of data that we have in Northern Ireland as well. So thanks, Ray. Can I move on then to Aidan?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
You can indeed, go ahead.
Great. So I'm just going to share my screen.
Okay, we can see it. Yeah.
That's brilliant. Okay. Thanks for inviting me to speak. I'm just going to look at the economic impacts of the hospitality sector in Northern Ireland, just to add to the presentations you've already heard. So I'm going to look at 3 things relatively quickly. How I'm defining the hospitality sector, the economic impact of that sector, and how that sector has been affected by COVID-19 restrictions, or what we know so far about how it's been affected. So throughout the paper that you have today and this presentation, I'm using a definition of the hospitality sector which is based on standard industrial classifications. So this is essentially all those businesses that fall into the accommodation and food sector, plus convention and trade show organisers. So this is much broader than the licensing trade, but the licensing trade is captured in that. So licensed restaurants are found within the restaurants and mobile food activities subsector, and licensed public houses and clubs are found in the beverage serving activities centre. So moving on to the economic impact of the hospitality sector, there's an infographic on page 200 of your packs, which provides a summary of the key headline figures. This is largely based on a paper prepared for Hospitality Ulster by the consultancy group BDO that was published in May of this year. That in turn was based on an earlier paper by Oxford Economics from 2015, and I've supplemented that with some data from ONS and NISRA. So just to drill down into some of those figures, the hospitality sector in 2007 was estimated to contribute around 4% of Northern Ireland's total GVA. That's the total contribution. Put that into a bit of perspective, the direct impact of our agriculture sector is around 2% of GVA, and at the other end of the scale, the direct impact of our manufacturing sector is around 15%. So the overall impact of the hospitality sector in terms of jobs was about 8.7% of Northern Ireland's jobs in 2017, and it generated the sector generated around 90 million pounds in tax revenue in 2013. Now this figure is a bit outdated, but it's the most recent that I could locate. Just to say that between 2013 and certainly 2017, the sector has experienced growth, so you'd expect the tax revenue to grow accordingly along with that. So those figures show the overall impact of the hospitality sector, and that's made up of what are called direct, indirect, and induced impacts. To give you a practical example of that, if you consider a restaurant will generate a profit and it also employs staff who they pay wages. These are direct impacts. The restaurant will also purchase goods and services from suppliers who will in turn employ staff. Those are the indirect impacts, or some of the indirect impacts. And the staff employed by the restaurants and by their suppliers will spend their wages in the broader economy on consumer products. And this is what we mean when we're talking about induced impacts. So this figure looks at the direct, indirect, and induced impacts of the sector in gross value added, employment, and wages. And if you just look at gross value added, for example, the overall contribution is about 1.6 billion. The majority of that, 56%, came from the direct impacts, but there are significant indirect and induced impacts. And why this is significant is that when we're considering changes to the hospitality sector, not only is it worth considering the direct impact on that sector, but how that will affect their suppliers and also the broader economy. So this set of figures here, it looks at just the direct impact of the sector, but it looks at it by broad subsectors. So it provides figures for turnover, employment, GVA, and wages. Just to say about this, you can see clearly that across all four measures, restaurants are the biggest driver, followed by hotels, followed by public houses, and there are smaller but significant contributions from the events management sector. Moving on to what we know so far about the impact of COVID-19 restrictions on the sector. The Hospitality Ulster paper I mentioned that was published in May projected that between 177 to 440 licensed premises could fail due to lockdown restrictions introduced in March. And that would have a knock-on effect of the loss of between around 9,500 to 15,500 jobs. Now, it's important to note that this focuses on just the licensed premises. It doesn't include the spillover effects, and that's what I was referring to in a previous slide about how interlinked the economy is. So you have to consider what would these business closures mean for suppliers to that business, and what would these business closures mean to the broader economy. This next figure looks at the output of the service sector throughout throughout 2019 and 2020. It's UK data, but it does provide an indication of broader pictures. So if we can see that up until approximately March of this year, the output of the sector was relatively stable. And then following the introduction of restrictions, the lockdown in March, we can see that the service sector, which is the dark black line, it experienced a decline. At its lowest point, it was 23% below baseline. Now, compare that to the accommodation and food sector, which is where licensed premises are located. This sector saw a decline of 91% below its baseline in April of 2020, and this was the largest decline across the whole services sector. Now, the sector has shown its signs of recovery. During the summer months, it rose again, but remained 9.5% below its baseline. It's important to recognise as well that this data doesn't capture the impact of the more recent restrictions that we've been under since October. The next set of figures looks quickly at the uptake of the Furlough scheme in Northern Ireland, and this is data that's from the end of July 2020. So you can see there from the first graphic that the proportion of eligible employees partaking in the Furlough scheme was highest in the accommodation and food sector of all the different sectors in Northern Ireland. 81% of eligible employees partook of the scheme. This figure compares uptake of the scheme in the accommodation food sector across UK regions, and we can see that Northern Ireland had the highest uptake of all UK regions, in July of 2020, and this is despite the overall uptake of the scheme across the economy being lower than a number of regions. So my final slide, Chair, uses it's really a novel data source. It uses Google Map data to show changes in visits to retail and recreation premises throughout 2020 across all Northern Ireland local government districts. The category retail and recreation includes licensed premises. It also includes what are commonly referred to as non-essential retail. It doesn't include groceries or pharmacies, which you can find in a separate category. So this isn't focused entirely on the licensed trade sector or the hospitality sector, but it does provide a good proxy for that, and it also gives us almost real-time information about changes to footfall in those sectors. So we can see that right across Northern Ireland, each local government district followed a similar pattern. In fact, at the lowest point, which was the 12th of April in 2020, the decline in footfall at the retail and recreation premises was 90% below the baseline. There were, again, it shows some recovery in line with easing restrictions, especially over the summer months. This can be most noticeable in places like the Causeway Coast and the Glens and Newry Morning Down. But we can also see that we're falling below the baseline in more recent months. Now, again, this data does not include the impact of the restrictions that we've been under since the 16th of October. But you would expect, due to given those restrictions, that we would see similar declines in footfall. So I'm going to stop there, Chair. Thank you for listening to me, and I'll take the questions at the end.
That's great, Aidan, and thank you to you also for that comprehensive brief as well. And thank you to all three of them. I know going forward, your research that you've done will be invaluable to this committee as we progress through the bill. I'll just then start off with a couple of questions for each of you. So I'll start off then with you, Eleanor, and it's just then. I'm actually going to ask you questions about stuff you didn't speak about. You'd be surprised to hear. The first one is to do with, we know we've been lobbied by our local producers here in Northern Ireland. We understand the reasons why we have, and they're not altogether happy with what they see in the face of the bill at the moment. So it's just to ask you around the rest of the UK and Republic of Ireland, if you have any information on how their licences that works for them over there, and how our bill as it sits at the moment, how it differs from them.
Well, at the moment as things stand, we have the most restrictive rules in terms of local producers. The Republic of Ireland in 2018 moved to relax some of those restrictions and to allow the local producers to sell their products to the public, but it can only be the products that they manufacture on their premises, and that if they want to, people want to consume alcohol on the premises, it has to be via a tour, which is quite similar to what the bill proposes. In Scotland and England in particular, it's more relaxed, but that's because they have a very different licensing regime. So over there, local producers have diversified to have things like tap rooms or restaurants, or to amalgamate their product with things like sightseeing and golfing. And, it seems to be quite a niche tourism product over there, and it's very much promoted by the tourism bodies in Scotland and in England. But we have very different licensing regime here, and things like the surrender principle come into play. So there's issues around that to consider.
Yeah, and I think our licensing we have here will cause us problems as we do go through this bill on some of these issues, and I think that's why probably to some extent we need to steer away maybe from comparisons with other jurisdictions because of our licensing laws. Just another thing then was to do with balance. I know many of us have said it in the chamber on the second stage that we wanted to see the balance, between alcohol misuse and supporting the hospitality and consumers and everything else. Are there any key issues that you would be aware of that do not support that sort of balanced approach within the bill as it stands at the moment?
We'll need to think about that more in depth, Chair.
I don't want to put you on the spot, Eleanor. We need you as a friend.
It's an extremely difficult balancing act for any legislature to balance the public health and also the promotion of the economy. I think the bill tries to do as much as it can to promote the public health aspect, but the things that the department can achieve within the bill in terms of public health are quite limited. I mean, this alcohol consumption and the licensed trade, those issues affects every single department, from the Department of the Economy right down to the Department of Infrastructure. So it's a really difficult balancing act. Other jurisdictions, it's in the paper, like there's an public health alcohol bill act, in the Republic of Ireland that goes beyond what our bill can achieve in terms of its introducing minimum alcohol prices in the Republic of Ireland and things like restrictions on advertising. It goes beyond what our bill, but I think that's probably a separate subject to consultation, and they'll probably occur at a later date in Northern Ireland in terms of when we're considering minimum unit pricing.
Thank you. As I say, I don't want to put any of you on the spot at all, and none of us will do this during this, because we absolutely are so appreciative of the work that all of you have done to help us with the scrutiny of the bill. Ray, if I could just move over to you, and I absolutely agree with you. When you were talking there, it just reminded me of my daughter is 30, and her and her two school friends meet regularly in the evening, and they go for a cup of coffee, or they go to the Rinka in Island McGee. Other ice cream shops are available, but that would be their meet up where they would go, and that they enjoy that more than going out somewhere for a drink. So I get when you said it, I kind of went, yeah, absolutely, you're right. I see that with my own children. I just wanted to ask you then around, I'd said it before, I've sat in the Health Committee for a long time, and there was always a major problem in Northern Ireland when it came to data gathering. We're not very good at gathering all that data. And I mean, I sometimes we forget about all of those hidden consequences of alcohol, or those other not necessarily hidden, but other consequences of alcohol, that you mentioned, and also epilepsy and Korsakoff's dementia, all of those various things. And I know that you'd said there are 2% of all registered deaths in NI are down to alcohol. I would say it's probably an awful lot higher than that, because of how deaths are recorded even in Northern Ireland, and how we record someone's death is not always it's not always the primary cause that is recorded. But it's just to ask you then about those sort of the concerns you've raised about the gaps in sort of information and data. Do you think that causes any issues with our scrutiny of the bill going forward?
A good question. I should maybe give you a bit of background about. I was referring to a survey. It was called the Adult Drinking Patterns Survey, and it was published by the Department of Health every 3 to 5 years. The last publication was in 2014. Now, it was based on a sample of around 2,000 respondents, and it looked at every aspect of alcohol consumption. And for example, it even went into alcohol intake, in that many of the respondents were asked to keep alcohol diaries in which they actually recorded their daily and weekly consumption. So you actually had hard data on how much alcohol was being consumed by the population. That information is no longer available to us. What you have instead is an annual health survey which looks at a large range of health indicators, and alcohol is only one of them. So you're getting a very small amount of information compared to what you once got. However, I should add now the ONS, the Office for National Statistics, they used to do a survey which was very similar to our own NISRA Department of Health one. However, they have also discontinued the publication of this survey from 2018, I think. So we aren't the only UK nation who has done that. I suspect the reasons are, I suppose, are linked to austerity, in that, like every other department over the past, 10 years, the Department of Health and NISRA have had staff cutbacks, so they've had to prioritize their work. In answer to your question, whether it will impact on the committee's deliberations, I'm not certain that it will have a major impact, but it would certainly have been useful to have had more information on the actual amounts which people are consuming, something we no longer have.
And I suppose just to say as well, Ray, I mean, any survey, but especially an annual health survey, is only as good as the recipients and their honesty. And we
Absolutely,
know with many, when it comes to health questions, people are not always honest on, especially on consumption of alcohol or how many cigarettes they smoke and things like that.
Sure.
So that rely on that.
You just raised with Ray whether or not we know the type of alcohol, whether or not there's variation between beer.
Do you go ahead and ask Ray that? Sorry, Robin just wants to come in on a point here. Go ahead, Robin.
Yes,
sorry, Ray.
Absolutely. Yeah, oh yeah. Now, that is also one of the items which we have lost in the in the old drinking patterns survey. They actually looked at the types of alcohol are consumed, whether it was wine, spirits, beers, alcohol, pops, all of those were listed, but we no longer have that information, unfortunately. Yeah, that's one of the items we lost when the survey ended. Okay. Yeah, I'm just looking through it here at the moment. Yeah, I can see, nothing on that, you know.
Just one final question I have for you. We know that we're likely to receive evidence from various health professionals or health bodies in relation to the misuse of alcohol. And we know that, I think you mentioned in your paper, there's a relatively small budget in Northern Ireland for tackling alcohol problems from the Department of Health. Again, how do we compare to other jurisdictions when it comes to the amount of money that is set aside to tackle either alcohol-related ill health or alcohol abuse?
Unfortunately, I don't have that information to hand, but I'll be happy to look that up for you.
No, that would be great. It's just that, you know, we will get that information, or we will be have evidence sessions, or hopefully they'll respond to our call for evidence. But it's just a case of, you know, they really have to be stepping up to the mark as well. It can't all be left to Department of Communities to sort these issues out. You know. No, thank you very much, Ray, for that. Kelly, did you want a supplementary on that?
No.
No, you'll come in later. Okay, and just then, Aidan, finally for you and the economic impacts and the economic benefits, and I know I can see that. I was looking at your graph earlier and I saw Causeway, Coast and Glens and nearly Morning Down, and I thought, my goodness, that was the place to be in the summer, or maybe not with COVID. I just thought, I wonder, did the COVID figures replicate any of your graphs as well? But that's for another committee to decide on that one, so it is. But it's just weighing up that against, I suppose, the public health costs and the policing costs, whether or not that's something that we should be exploring as well, going through this bill.
I think so, Chair. Ray alluded to this in his presentation. Well, Ray spoke about this in his presentation. For every hospital admission, every time the police are called out, there's a cost to the public purse for that, and then absenteeism from work cost businesses, and then we've also got the cost of premature deaths. So that's estimated to be 900 million. Now, just on a very black and white, the estimate for 900 million, you could balance that against a 1.6 billion GVA contribution, and obviously you're more in the profit side, but I don't think we should be talking about profit and loss when we're talking about people's health. One thing, that 900 million figure is from 2014 as well, and as Ray mentioned, there has been declines in hospital admissions. So it would be interesting to see if it was possible to get a more up-to-date figure on that. Again, I don't know if the data is still available or is collected in that way, but there is an interesting audit office report looking at the cost of alcohol and substances that I could share with the committee if they find that useful.
Yeah, that would be useful. And I'm not setting out there to say that that these are, one should be balanced off against the other. Absolutely not, because I think people in general need to take responsibility. It's not always government's responsibility when people need to take responsibility for their own alcohol consumption and their own health. So that's not my intention in that line of question either, just to say that. That's me kind of washed up at the minute. I'll maybe come back in if I need to, but I have Alex and I have Kelly, I have Sinead and I have Mark. So Alex.
Thank you, Chair. That just because of my line of questioning doesn't mean I've got one way of thinking or another. I'd like to think I'm quite open-minded, and I certainly don't have a problem with people drinking or going to the pub, and I have been to the pub, so I'm declaring an interest. Just some of my questioning obviously is going to be on health stuff and a few other wee bits and pieces. Is there any evidence that if we allowed pubs to close an hour later, that it staggers people coming out in a more better and orderly way for the police and everybody to cope? Or is there any evidence that everybody would just pile out an hour later? Is there anything on that? That's my first question, so I don't mind who answers that. Also, my other question, it's good to know that people aren't attending maybe a hospital as much. It's becoming less with drinking alcohol, but at the same time, deaths have increased as well. And there is still 13,000 people coming to hospital a year, although those figures may not be correct. What's to say that if we open an extra hour and we relax the restrictions for Easter, that won't get worse over time? Is there any help you can give us to sort of figure that out in any way that you've already said? And that's my two main questions, really.
Yeah, I'm happy to try to cover that one. We only looked in a very preliminary way at some of the evidence. Because to look at it in a comprehensive way, it's quite an intensive process. So I've concluded in the paper some examples of research that's done, and they're very conflicting in terms of what impact extended opening hours have on things like crime or dispersal from the premises. So some of them suggest that for every hour that a bar opens, that it increases the number of things like assaults. But there's also some studies, like there's a study in Sweden that monitored nightclubs that were allowed to open an extra hour and found actually it decreased crime. But in that case, there was very open communication between the police and the premises themselves. And there was also inspectors coming in and out of the premises to check the things that were operating as they should. So I can't give you a definitive answer on that because we've only looked preliminary at some studies. I would say some of the public health stakeholders that you're going to talk to would know much more about those studies. And as I mentioned, in Scotland, it's really the only comprehensive study within the UK that's actually going to look at the issues such as dispersal and the impact on ambulance service, on police, and also on the premises themselves, whether, not all premises will want to open late. It'll also look at the economic benefits of that. So I'm sorry, Alex, I can't give you a straightforward answer to that question.
So if I could add something to that, one of the major issues about alcohol consumption is that compared with, say, 40, 50 years ago, it's in real terms, it's considerably less expensive than what it once was. And I think price may be a major factor if you want to lower alcohol consumption. I think there's some evidence, but not some preliminary evidence, maybe from Scotland, I think, that if you increase the minimum price per unit, alcohol consumption may fall. So there's an issue about affordability and alcohol consumption there.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Alex. Kelly?
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you all for your papers and your presentations. It's given me more questions than I thought I would ever have on this subject.
No.
But just looking at the nighttime economy, one thing I know, Aidan, you talked a lot about the impact in the hospitality industry, but as we know, it extends beyond that. I'm a bit concerned about the work that's been done in the nighttime economy with other types of businesses. So, for instance, taxis. There is an impact on the working time directive and the amount of hours that taxi drivers can drive under their licence. So say, for instance, a taxi driver does a school run in the afternoon, and that's maybe their first jobs of the day. So that's 3 o'clock in the afternoon, maybe 2:30, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. If they are to also work the shift that's now extended to 3 o'clock in the morning, they're way outside working time directive and the operating hours for taxis. I take it you guys haven't had any papers or sight of anything coming from infrastructure talking about that nighttime economy, how we get people home?
From my perspective, no, I haven't. It's not something I consider. It's a good point. One thing I would say, just to add to your point, is the possibility that extended opening hours would actually generate the need for more taxi drivers and increase employment in that sector. So I guess it's just a counter consideration.
To be honest, I don't agree on that one. I think actually it'll cut it down quite a bit, because unless you have a contract for school, depending on late night opening or late night coming home from pubs, that's for the part-time taxi drivers, it's not for the full-timers. It's that working time directive. They'll end up losing their licence if they try to do daytime work and this very late night, early morning types of transport. Because if you're taking somebody for an hour, driving for an hour to get them home and then back again, you've lost any other trade. But it's something I think that we do need to consider. I just want to go back as well to Eleanor's, your point on clause 2. The Scottish local licensing forms is really interesting, because I had asked the minister or the department, for a bit of a breakdown on who currently holds licences, and I was told to go to the district courts to get the detail on that. I'm assuming then that something like this Scottish local licensing forum would be able to hold a list of all the licence holders with a little bit more detail attached to that, who the licence holder is, sort of our Section 75 considerations. Is that what they do?
I'm sure, I think data collection in general in Scotland seems to be a bit better in here in terms of licensed premises. Yeah, I'm sure they do have data on that. I'm not saying that these are perfect forms, but it's just a very interesting example in terms of how you share intelligence on the impact of things like extended open hours. There's some very good pubs and clubs have really good best practice and really run their businesses really well. But you want to be able to, for them even, to share, information that some of their counterparts maybe aren't operating as they should. I don't know what the infrastructure is here in terms of sharing that information, the flow of information between courts and the department, between licensed premises and courts and the department, and also other bodies like health trusts, for example. And also within the bill, there's a lot of clauses to do with children and young people. So the views of social workers, safeguarding board, they would also be important factors. I just don't know how that sits currently.
It's interesting when you compare it to the other part of communities' consideration, housing in local areas, as all MLAs will know, that there are local groupings come together, of key stakeholders to discuss housing issues, whether it's pressure on housing, antisocial behaviour. It could be anything that they're discussing, and there's that multi-agency approach which works really, really well, including the police. So it's a really interesting way of looking at licensing, as opposed to it just being in the courts and the department doesn't have the full information about all the licence holders. It's actually the people who will be impacted and who can add value to considerations on licences. Yeah, but I take it theirs is more, rather than issuing the licence, theirs is more about what happens.
They're more of an advisory body, and they can take part as well in appeals and things on premises licenses, and get you some more information that if you want on that, just a few pages of a bit more background on what those boards do and what their role is, how they fit into the licensing structure.
I think it's just one of those things, if we consider Northern Ireland, we're not homogenous the whole way across Northern Ireland. In my constituency, there wouldn't be any nightclubs, that would be open to, 3 o'clock in the morning. There's a lot of rural pubs where it would never come into consideration. But it's interesting that in different areas there will be different reactions to the nighttime economy and people coming out of pubs and the impact that it has on health. And it would be interesting to see that sort of local input to something that's just seen as a wider project. But no, very good. As I say, my head's now melted trying to think of all these questions, so thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Thanks, Kelly. Sinead? No, I'll go to Mark and then I'll come back to Sinead. So Mark, are you there?
Yeah, I'm still here, Chair. Thank you for the presentation, and I think, like Isa says there, it's thrown up a lot more questions, and certainly I think vindicated in some way our decision not just to extend the consultation period, but the acceptance that we had as a committee that by extending the consultation period, we're not going to have this through and sorted for Easter 21. There's a lot of work to be done to get this right, and it's important that we take the time to do that rather than rush through something half-baked. And the more we look into it, the more work we realise that it does need done. Just in terms of a wee point there Kelly had made, on the taxi industry. You'll recall I had said that they should be called in as part of the call for evidence too, but my experience would be that rather than create employment in the taxi industry, we have seen a decline in the number of taxi drivers for various reasons. And from what I know, many taxi drivers will go out on a Friday or Saturday night with a target. They say, okay, when I make £150, I'm going home, or 200 or whatever. So the earlier they get that, the earlier they go home. And it leads to a situation later on at night then, at kicking out time, there are fewer on the road. And if kicking out time, as I've described it, is later, there's possibly going to be even fewer taxis on the road, and you couldn't blame them, because the later it gets, generally the messier it gets. But I think it is very important that we hear from that industry. Also, I think in terms of impact on staff in the hospitality sector themselves, there are clear issues there, and I don't know if there's any work that has been done on that in other jurisdictions to look at the impact on them, because you're not just talking about making a later closing time, but you're also extending the drinking up time, which means people will be working for, well, not huge amounts of pay by any means, but working the extremely antisocial hours, and then they'll be faced with the difficulty of trying to get home if there are fewer taxis on the road as well. I think the key here, though, to remember is that bars, should this legislation pass, don't have to stay open till the time that they're allowed to, and I think flexibility is very important. I think, Eleanor, the points that you touched on around major events were very interesting, particularly regarding major events taking place elsewhere. So you could have a World Cup, with strange kick-off times. You could have matches kicking off at 9 o'clock in the morning or whatever. Would bars, in some instances, want to open for that? And then who decides what's a major event and what isn't? That could be problematic as well. So I think that, like I was saying, we have to look at take this opportunity, because we've given ourselves the time, or will have the time, to look at the very fundamentals of our licensing system and not just tinker around with it. The surrender principle was mentioned there. I think that's something we have to look at, rather than using that as a reason as to why we can't do other things. We have to look at those core components and see if they need changed themselves to allow the industry to grow as an employer, as an economic driver for the region. But we have to do everything we can to counter any problems that might be associated with it. And they were correctly touched upon in terms of the issues around policing, and I know that some of those were raised at the last stage in the Assembly. Just, Raymond, in terms of your presentation, and I was interested that you noted, well, it wasn't you that noted, the evidence was there to suggest that there'd been a dramatic reduction in the amount of underage drinking. I think, was it from 2011 to 2016? Had there been any analysis done as to why that is the case? I know there seems to have been, I think the chair identified maybe more alternatives in terms of coffee shops or that now, maybe an increased focus on fitness and general health. But alarmingly, I would say, I know in our kind of antisocial hotspots or areas that would be popular with young ones to go and drink their carryouts, many moons ago I'd have been getting phone calls from residents complaining about carpets of cans and bottles littering fields and laneways in mornings. Now that doesn't seem to be as much of an issue. But if you go to those same hotspots, you'd be horrified to find the amount of little polythene bags lying around. So I don't know, has there been perhaps an increase in accessibility to illegal drugs? Yeah.
I suspect there are a number of factors implicated in that. First of all, as you suggested, there may have been a move away from alcohol towards prescription drugs and illegal substances, you see that more and more. So that'll be one factor. Alcohol among young people isn't as cool as it once was in my time and my generation, my cohort. But I think the other factor is, as the chair and myself also indicated, when I was a young, I was in my 20s in the 1970s, right at the beginning of the conflict here, and almost the only places where young people were able to socialize were venues selling alcohol, whether that was in bars or clubs or whatever. So there were very few outlets for young people where alcohol wasn't available. Nowadays, there's a whole range of other options like ice cream parlors, chocolatiers, coffee bars, which have sprung up everywhere. So there are more choices available to young people than there were when I was growing up in the 1970s, 80s, you know. So I think that there's two factors, but there may also be others as well. I'm not certain, but they're the two most obvious which spring to mind, you know.
Okay, thank you. And Aidan, in terms of your presentation and the piece on the economic impact of the hospitality sector, and it's undoubted the contribution that it does make. Is there similar data, or is there further, I nearly says distillation, but breakdown of that, so you could see similarly the impact of the off-sales sector on the wider economy? And then I'd say work has been done when we look then at the COVID impact on the sector. We see how hospitality has been hammered, yet I think it's fair enough to assume, and like I'm sure the evidence is there, that off sales have skyrocketed.
I would need to look into that. The problem often with the data is that the disaggregation of it isn't at a fine enough detail to get that sort of level of understanding. But I'm happy to have a look at it and to see what other sort of studies there have been on the off sales, and get back to you on it, if that's okay.
Super, thank you. And then on the issue around the discount schemes, I know we had evidence last week or the week before from Aidan Connolly, and he actually raised a point that I hadn't considered, and that was around, you know, these points that some of the bigger supermarkets would use and how they can be offset against the cost of alcohol, and how difficult it would be for supermarkets to do away with that system, and how unfair it would be to people living here. My concern would be now, and I don't know if it's one that would be shared by other members, is that if we do away with a discount scheme except for supermarkets, it makes the playing field even more uneven. And I know many in the sector, in fact I can't think of any in the sector who don't think that it's already an uneven playing field. I'm sorry, Chair, I forgot to declare an interest this time as well. But
that's okay. You finished? Who was going to?
Yeah.
All right, okay. Aidan, did you want to come in there?
No, it's just,
you're all right?
it wasn't something I considered, but
all right.
I can look at it if the committee wishes.
Okay, that's grand. Okay, thank you, Aidan. I know Sinead had her hand up earlier and then we kind of lost that, so I'm going to ask Sinead I don't want to finish without asking her. There, she's back on. Sinead, have you anything you want to ask? Can't hear you, Sinead. You must be on silent.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Chair. Thanks for bringing me back in, Chair. Appreciate that. Yeah, no, just thanks to the guys for the presentation. It's definitely going to help us now going forward in terms of, being able to question any witnesses that we get before the committee. It's just a point that was raised whenever Aidan Connolly was at the committee last week. And I'm just wondering if it could be included in any sort of future research papers that we're getting to the committee. And it was just the point around advertising and how that impacts on the issue of problem drinking. So it's just, I would like to see just, even if there isn't a study specific to here in the north, if there was studies done elsewhere across these islands, we could just get a bit more information on how advertising and how that impacts on problem drinking, and how the regulation of advertising could help to address that problem. If there was any sort of information on that, I would certainly find that helpful going forward.
We could contact some of our counterparts down south, because it's in the paper, and you probably already know of the Public Health Alcohol Act down south, which, there's a whole raft of advertising restrictions that is introduced, such as alcohol emblems on children's clothing, alcohol advertising within the vicinity of schools, on public transport. So they may have already done a body of work into that, and Scotland as well. So I'm sure there's some material that we can get you on that.
Yeah, thank you, Eleanor. Appreciate that.
Okay, thanks, Sinead. Robin?
Is just a short question, Chair, to Ray, if I can. I find the figure 1 that you've outlined in your presentation, the alcohol-specific deaths by registration, year and gender. Obviously, there's a growing increase in alcohol-related deaths there. But when you move to your figure 3 on the data on alcohol admissions, and it indicates that there is a decreasing, a very sharp decreasing rate on admissions to hospital for alcohol disorders. Do you mean?
Yes. Yeah. You want to know why is one increasing and the other isn't?
Very sharp decrease in figure 3 that you've outlined.
It is actually. I'm just looking at it here, and the 3 years, 2016 to 2019, it fell to 673 per 100,000, whereas 5 years earlier it was 728. I should also add, however, if you go back to figure 1, you will see, I'm just looking at it now, you will see during that brief period, especially in the last 2 to 3 years, the number of alcohol deaths has also fallen as well. So they're kind of way in sync, to at least to some extent. Alcohol-related deaths were rising until about 2016. But over the past 2 to 3 years, they have also fallen. So it's in sync, really, I think. I'm just looking back between figure 1 and figure 3 here. Yeah, I can't explain why there's a slight divergence, but I would need to look in more detail at that. But
can I just stop there? Ray, figure 1 shows to me from 2013 right through to 17.
That's right.
An annual increase. And then on 17 to 18, it shows a...
you're absolutely right,
And that doesn't...
It's only in the last year, but whereas hospital admissions have been falling since 20, I suppose that 3 years.
From 2013-14, then you're seeing a decrease.
I'm not sure why, although I'm not certain they have to be in complete synchronization. They both have to be falling at the same rate. I would need to look at that, but I'm not certain there's any simple explanation for that.
No,
I'm just looking.
It's too simple to take as just. It may well be that there are other forms of treatment that you don't.
Yeah, there may be other factors involved.
Yeah. But it's
I'm sorry, I can't be more helpful there, but I don't see an obvious explanation there for that.
No.
I suppose if I could just say on that, as someone who worked in the health service for a number of years, I mean, the way that we categorise and we capture data of hospital admissions is not necessarily, it could be someone is admitted and their admission will say they were admitted with a respiratory condition. But that respiratory condition could have been a direct impact of. So very rarely and that's where the data collection again it can be a bit skewed when it comes to the health service, because their way of capturing data is it's not a black and white way of capturing it. And it's the same with the deaths. I said to Ray earlier with registering deaths as well. It's not always, it's sometimes the secondary cause is the cause of death and not the primary. So it's all a wee bit ambiguous, I think, when it comes to especially health figures, Okay, folks, I think that's pretty much everybody has asked, and thank you very much for giving us the understanding of listening to us as well of some of our questions. It really was very worthwhile. You've done a fantastic job for us. I suppose just to say then to the committee, then with the committee then, can I propose that the clerk then goes away and looks at more detail at these research papers and some of the gaps and some of the questions that have been highlighted here. And I know Kelly will certainly, if you have any extra questions as well, if we can feed those questions through them, because then there's something that we would want to be putting to the department, a lot of these issues that have been raised from the paper. So thank you, folks, really appreciate it. Really do. And no doubt we will be calling on your expertise as we go along. So thank you.
Yes, please.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay, members, we're going to then move swiftly on because we know we're time bound as always in our morning meetings. So if we can move then along to agenda item 7 and 8 to know we stop tripping over things, Janice. Okay. Let me see, agenda item 7 and 8, departmental briefing on SL1's registration of clubs account regulations NI 2020 and the licensing of registration of clubs Amendment Act Northern Ireland 2011 Commencement number 6 order NI 2020. That was really easy for me to say. Can I inform members they've been provided with a copy of the SL1 starting at page 218 of your meeting pack. And then can I welcome to the meeting Carol Reid and Eamon Diver. I can see Carol on. Is Eamon on? Maybe Eamon's maybe on under a different name.
Should be. You should have dialed in.
Okay.
I'm here. Can you not hear me?
I can hear you. I just can't see your name up. That's the problem. But I can certainly hear you, so can. Okay, we're under a little bit of time pressure, as you know, today. I asked for this to come back because I had some questions around it. So, Carol, if it's yourself, whoever it is, could you just give us a pretty brief outline? Because it was just 1 or 2 questions that I have. That's all. If you could go ahead.
Yes, certainly. Now, I had a bit of background. If you want me to jump, I can jump straight to what the actual key easements are going to be. I had a bit of background just about how we got to this point, but if it's more about the key easements, then I can just go straight to that.
Well, here, what about, Carol? I'd explain what my concerns are, because it might be to do with the background actually as well.
Okay.
Some of the concerns that I had over this were coming from whenever I had met with clubs. So I had, along with some of my party members, and the clubs are saying that the bigger clubs were perfectly fine with, you know, the way that they have to, their accountancy, and especially those that sell alcohol and what they have to do and the rules and regulations around that. And they were perfectly acceptive of that and said, yes, we understand fully. But there are a lot of smaller clubs out there that have very, very few members, and they're put under extreme pressures then to spend vast amounts of money, which they don't have. When it comes to their accountancy, and albeit they do accept that the regulations state they have to do all of these things. So it was just that's why I'd asked this to come back. This maybe has nothing to do with that at all, and maybe you'll tell me no, this is not what this is about. But just that's.
No, it will.
Go ahead, Carol.
Yeah, sorry. No, it will fit in there. So I mean, yes. There always needs to be some sort of appropriate control there whenever you're dealing with finances. The key elements or the key easements really will help out the smaller and some of the medium-sized clubs as well. So in terms of what they are and what practically that will mean for them, there's a requirement at the minute for the club to send a copy of accounts and an auditor's report, and obviously an auditor's report will be quite costly to the PSNI. That is going to be replaced where there's only going to be a requirement to send that information on the request of the PSNI. So it won't be every club that will need to do that. It would only be on request. Also, they currently have to inform the PSNI whereabouts they keep all of their financial documentation, and that's going to be removed. The system of control of accounts is going to be removed from the regulations and placed in guidance. So what that will look like is there's going to be a reduced level and frequency of some of their checks. So, for example, there's petty cash reconciliations. They are going to be moved from weekly to monthly. A cost impact to them is there normally needs to be an independent person for the like of routine stock checks or reconciliation. And say that is normally a paid independent person, and that's going to be removed. There won't be a requirement for that anymore. And the need to keep certain records is going to be removed as well. So that will definitely be helpful in terms of the financial side. Small clubs where that's basically anybody with a gross annual income of less than 300,000, which I believe is a large section of registered clubs. They're going to be allowed to prepare a receipt and payments account rather than an annual statement of accounts, which is more onerous. So again, it won't be as costly for them to do that. Bringing in the medium clubs then as well as the small clubs, so that would then include any club with a gross annual income of up to 500,000. They're going to be able to choose to have an independent examination of their accounts rather than a formal audit. So that's going to be less time, it's going to be less time consuming, it's going to be less costly for them as well. So there isn't going to be a need for a qualified accountant to do that work for the smaller clubs. They would be able to have a competent examiner to undertake that work. I mean, there's sort of five key easements there, and they really do. It's the small and medium-sized clubs that are being captured there.
No, I think, Carol, you have answered all of my queries that I had, because that's what was brought up with me. And as I say, they weren't saying that they weren't complaining about having having regulation in place, because they absolutely agree 100%. But we do know of, and many of our constituencies will maybe have a very small club. Could be a cricket club, could be anything, a bowling club. With a bar that has a small membership, and it was just was costing them more money to do these returns than it was actually what they were making. So I think that's good news. It certainly, I know we have the clubs in next week briefing us on the bill. So that just in case they knew it wasn't under the competency of the bill, but they might bring it up. But no, Carol, thank you. There you go. You've answered my questions.
Absolutely.
I'd ask if any members have any questions, or was it just me? Any members any questions on that? Are everybody happy enough with that then? Yeah. Okay, look, Carol and Eamon, and sorry Eamon, we didn't even get speaking to you.
No problem, Chair.
Thank you so much for that
No
clarity.
problem.
I am sure that there'll be plenty of clubs out there that will be very glad to, and this will be very welcome news for them, so thank you.
Okay, no problem. Take care now. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye. Bye. Okay, folks, then we can move then on to agenda item 9, which is a briefing again by Reyes. My goodness, I don't think this has ever happened in this committee before. Going back, and this is on our sign language legislation, another really, really important piece of legislation that the committee has great interest in. Members, you'll find this at page 227 of your meeting packs. And then can I welcome then Karen Mccauley from Assembly Research. Karen, you're very welcome. Do you want to go ahead and give us a briefing?
Sure, absolutely. So I've got about 10 minutes to run through here. Is that okay, or do you want me to go even shorter?
Karen, I think that's okay. I mean, this is just a research briefing. We're not going to bombard you with questions, I wouldn't hope. And we will have a briefing on from the sign language people in January anyway. So just go ahead.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Thanks very much, Chair. And good afternoon, members, and thank you for having me along today. As Chair mentioned, you'll find a copy of this paper on page 227 of your packs. And this paper is an overview of approaches to sign language legislation in Scotland and Ireland, and it compares these acts with proposals for legislation in Northern Ireland. So in the briefing today, I'm going to discuss 3 areas. I'll first give you some background information about sign languages. Second, I'll briefly describe the international conventions regarding sign language protections, and I'll summarise the British Sign Language Act of Scotland from 2015 and the Irish Sign Language Act of 2017. And then third, I'll compare and contrast the Scottish and Irish Sign Language Acts with proposals for legislations in this jurisdiction. So one of the common aims of sign language legislation is to promote awareness. So I'll start by describing some common misconceptions about sign languages, which you can find on page 237. First of all, British Sign Language and Irish Sign Language are distinct languages, and this means they don't depend on and they're not strongly related to the spoken versions of English and Irish. They have their own sentence structure and grammar, and this is one of the reasons why expecting deaf sign language users to use English text services such as subtitling is not always an appropriate way in which to communicate. Sign languages are 3-dimensional, and by this I mean they depend on facial gestures as well as body language to convey meaning. And the reason I mention that is because some meaning can be lost when 2-dimensional forms of communication are used, such as video conferencing. Also, British Sign Language is not the same as sign-supported English, and one of the versions of that you may have heard of is Mccauley. Mccauley uses gestures from British Sign Language as well as signs and speech, but it follows the grammar of spoken English, so it's not the same as British Sign Language. And there isn't a universal sign language, so users of American, British and Australian sign languages wouldn't necessarily understand each other. And also there's variances between different regions as well. So this can cause complications for UK-wide provision of services where there are different versions in different regions. And also with Irish Sign Language, users, male and female users have different versions as well. So all of these points are important to note when considering proposals for the legislation, particularly when thinking about the provision of communication services. So while researching the reasons why sign language legislation is being proposed in Northern Ireland, a few key points came to light, and I'll address these now, and they can be found on pages 238 to 242 of the paper. The first key point, which actually relates to some of the discussion that we've had earlier today as well, is the challenge of finding baseline data on the number of British and Irish Sign Language users in Northern Ireland. And I'm mentioning this because trying to plan future resources will be difficult, as the number of users that I find through the different pieces of research that are out there vary so widely. So the point was highlighted as a concern when the Culture, Arts and Leisure Committee were briefed by the department in 2014. Figures that are most regularly quoted are 7,500 deaf sign language users, with 5,000 of those using British Sign Language and 2,500 using Irish Sign Language. And when you include family, friends, teachers and interpreters in that figure, it rises to around 18,000 sign language users in Northern Ireland. However, this number has been questioned by some researchers in Queen's University in Belfast. The department reported from the Continuous Household Survey in 2013-2014 that 9% of adults in Northern Ireland can communicate using sign language, 8% of those using British Sign Language, and 1% using Irish Sign Language. Now, however, the World Health Organization uses a ratio that changes that number again. So their ratio is 1 to 1,000. So as you can see, there's a large difference in the numbers quoted. However, there's an opportunity in the 2021 census to try and address this. And in Scotland's national plan, which has resulted from their Scottish Sign Language legislation, addressing the data gap is the first action listed out of the 70 actions that they have in the national plan. So it's a difficulty that exists in other jurisdictions as well. Another key consideration that came up through the research was addressing the different perceptions or attitudes to deafness. And the reason I'm going to talk a little bit about this is because the research shows that these different attitudes actually have played an influence on the type of legislation and protections that are available. So academic research on deaf studies describes cultural, social, medical attitudes to deafness, and the medical view of deafness tends to perceive deafness as a loss that can be fixed. So a lot of the disability legislation would come in under that sort of attitude. The social perception views the environment as a disabling factor to sign language users, and so that sort of view tends to encourage the provision of access to communication services and promotes integration. And then the cultural model acknowledges the cultural and linguistic value of sign languages and the community of sign language users. And this means recognising the sign language user community as having their own behaviours, values, knowledge and fluency in sign languages. And the recognition and promoting awareness of sign languages that are included in many of the sign language acts around the world. This is in response to the cultural view of deafness. So this is relevant to the situation here because at present, most of the protections for the deaf community in Northern Ireland come under the Disability Discrimination Act of 1995, Section 75 of the Northern Ireland Act in 1998, and the Disability Discrimination Northern Ireland Order in 2006. In England, Scotland and Wales, there's also the Equality Act of 2010, but that doesn't form part of the law in Northern Ireland. So in these disability and equality pieces of legislation, the key term is the provision of reasonable adjustments. And in the main, this usually refers to access to communication services, such as an interpreter. And why I'm mentioning this is twofold. First, to access these reasonable adjustments, there is no, where there is no sign language legislation, then deaf sign language users need to identify as disabled, and many in the deaf community want to be recognised as a cultural linguistic minority. And second, the research shows that the provision of reasonable adjustments, such as sign language interpreters to support with access to health, education and other services, is still hard despite the disability legislation. And a House of Commons early day motion in 2013 suggests that this difficulty of accessing communication services was due to a lack of public awareness of sign language and interpreters. So recognition and in turn raising public awareness are key points within sign language legislation. And the research has shown that the employment, health and educational outcomes for people who are deaf are poorer than the hearing community. And this is despite the disability legislation that's been in place since the 1990s. So next, I'm going to mention some of the international conventions that seek to protect sign language users, and you can find details of these on pages 243 and 244. The reason I'm mentioning these is because elements of the Scottish and Irish sign language legislation are similar to some of the articles in these conventions. So if you turn to page 243 and refer to table 3, the commitments included in parts 2 and 3 of the Council of Europe's Charter for Regional and Minority Languages are similar to elements in both the Scottish and the Irish Sign Language Acts, and I'll discuss these elements further in the next part of the briefing. Other international conventions to consider include the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. They both include articles relevant to sign language legislation, and in Wales, where the UNCRC is part of its domestic law through the Rights of Children and Young People Wales measure of 2011. One of the results of this legislation is that families with deaf children are provided with support to learn the sign language. So the next part of the briefing will cover the different forms of legislation in Scotland and Ireland and compare this with the proposals for legislation in Northern Ireland. So if you refer to Table 4 on page 252, I've created a matrix to help compare the Scottish and Irish Sign Language Acts with the proposals for legislation in Northern Ireland. Now, from the research into different examples of sign language legislation that exists around the world, there seems to be sort of 4 recurrent themes that start to emerge. There's the recognition element, the responsibility, communication services, and then the reporting. And these 4 themes are included to varying degrees in the Irish and the Scottish Sign Language Acts, as well as the proposals for Northern Ireland. So the Scottish Sign Language legislation follows a similar approach to that used in the Gaelic Language Scotland Act of 2005. The similarity in the 2 pieces of legislation is the placing of a duty on public authorities to produce plans of how they're going to support the use of the language. A difference is that the Gaelic legislation established an organisation to implement the legislation by managing that planning and review process. In the British Sign Language Scotland Act, the responsibility for this activity is with the Scottish ministers. So the resulting Scottish British Sign Language National Plan was then published in 2017. It included 70 actions and 10 long-term goals for Scottish ministers. And another significant difference between the Scottish Act and the Act in Ireland and proposals in Northern Ireland is the acknowledgement of the tactile form of British Sign Language, which the community of deafblind users use. So in terms of the provision of communication services, the Irish legislation makes specific reference to legal proceedings, early years provisions, education, regulation of interpretation services, broadcasting and events access. And in the proposals for Northern Ireland, both of these approaches are used. So the sort of inclusion of plans, the preparation, publication and implementation of plans is proposed as a function of executive ministers, which is then similar to the Scottish Act. Free classes for families of deaf children, the use of sign languages in legal proceedings, interpreter provision and regulation, as well as provision of continuing education requirements, are also specifically mentioned in the draft proposals for Northern Ireland. So in the paper, I've described the accompanying policies, which are the National Listed Authorities plans in Scotland and the National Disability Inclusion Strategy in Ireland. And in Northern Ireland, it's the Sign Language Framework. But for the next part of this briefing, I'll just keep it to a high-level overview of the legislation rather than going into those policies. So some key points when you're comparing the 3 approaches to sign language legislation are around recognition of sign language is handled differently in each jurisdiction. In Scotland, recognition is the duty of the Scottish ministers. In Ireland, the ISL user community has the right to use, develop and preserve Irish Sign Language. And in Northern Ireland, Irish and British Sign Languages are to be defined and recognised as official languages to guarantee services. Also, the sign language user community have the right to develop, use and preserve the language and the culture. Also, in each jurisdiction, a minister is given lead or special responsibility. It's the Minister for Childcare and Early Years in Scotland. In Ireland, it's the Minister for Justice and Equality, and in Northern Ireland, it's the Minister for Communities. However, to support a collaborative and effective response, all Scottish ministers are responsible for laying plans with the Scottish Parliament and for their departments and associated listed authorities. In the Irish Act, the Minister for Education and Skills, the Minister for Employment Affairs and Social Protection, and the Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform are all specifically mentioned in the legislation, as well as the Minister for Justice and Equality. And in Northern Ireland, functions of the executive ministers are included as part of the proposals for the sign language legislation. Now, when you compare the access to communication services with regards to justice, early years, education, interpretation, the Scottish national plans is where they've laid out 10 long-term goals and 70 actions with regards to these. The Irish legislation, however, makes specific reference to details regarding the use of sign language in these various different areas, and this is similar to the approach that's been taken in Northern Ireland. So the reporting and the review process is included in both the Scottish and Irish Acts, but it's not in the Northern Irish proposals, although reporting is mentioned in the accompanying Northern Ireland Sign Language Framework. And in Scotland, the Act received royal assent in October 2015. The national plan was published in 2017, and the first review was due to be published in October 2020, but it's been postponed until 2021 due to COVID-19. And in Ireland, the Act doesn't actually commence until December 2020, so there are no reviews of progress published as yet. So lastly, I'll just conclude by mentioning some considerations for the development of the legislation and for that process over the coming months. Some of the best practice that's emerged during the research that was completed for this paper is this idea of the co-design of the legislation and the importance of that and the supporting policies. And doing that co-design piece with the sign language user community and its supporting organisations. And also in terms of a way to communicate with the community, the use of social media to engage has also been sort of viewed as best practice as well. So thank you, Chair, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Karen, and that was done in record-breaking time. I think that's evidence session. Again, I don't know if you were listening to part of our previous briefing with Ray's about the lack of good quality data, and I mean it's absolutely here again. You know that we don't have that data for people that use either BSL or ISL, and you're telling us then it would be 2021 until the census before that data then would be compiled, which is it's a bit strange really when it comes to the data gathering here in Northern Ireland in general. You know, how do we know how much money to put into anything if we don't have the data to back that up? So that's just a sideline, and it's a real gripe of mine when it comes to data gathering. I'd mentioned there we have a briefing session early January from some users in relation to the VRS system, and I know when I've met with them they've talked about Scotland and about their legislation, and I think it has been set up as almost nearly a model of how to do things right, and I know that the Minister has plans to bring forward our legislation soon, that we'll get to see that soon in the committee here. So it's just really then to ask you, is there anything jumping out at you that we need to prioritise within that? I do imagine, Karen, whenever we do get that legislation in front of us, we'll have you with us again just to refresh us and go through all of that, but it's just really just to ask you at this stage, is there anything jumping out at you that we need to look at as a matter of priority?
Yeah, well, as part of this research, as well as looking at best practice and what's happened in Scotland and Ireland, I've also looked at the different jurisdictions around the world that have sign language legislation. And I think one of the things that, although it's mentioned in the sign language framework, the Northern Ireland Sign Language Framework, it's not in the proposals for legislation, is around that reporting piece. And that's having had a look through the debates and some of the reports that have come out from the different supporting organisations in Scotland. Having those deadlines and having that side of things is really key. So that might be something to talk to the department around in terms of sort of the reasoning behind not including that in the legislation proposals. I think as well that co-design piece is really important, and how Scotland managed to ensure that there was collaboration across the different departments was around placing the responsibility on the Scottish Minister. So it's included in the Northern Ireland proposals, but it's definitely something to sort of keep in mind as a key point for this as well. And you mentioned the VRS, there's a good example of where that's, health and communities departments need to work together for that. So, that's something that for the access to justice, that requires a couple of departments working together, and the same with education as well, and the regulation of interpreters.
Yeah, thanks for that. Absolutely agree with you that co-design, and it's across the entire assembly, every facet of the assembly, that we need to do this right, but also the co-design needs to involve all of those people that use the sign language on a daily basis, or whatever other method they may use to communicate, that they are part of this as well. And I mean, I know certainly as the committee, we will want to make sure we include as many people as possible whether that's through written or oral evidence or sign evidence. So look, thanks for that. I know Kelly will be eager to ask a few questions here. Kelly?
Sure.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to check, whenever you did the comparison, it's page 252, it's table 4, when the comparison of the Irish and British Sign Language and the Northern Ireland draft proposals. Bit concerned here that the proposals seem to I'll just see if I'm reading this right. The proposals are looking at early years, but there are a number of people like myself whose hearing impairments and deafness come about later in life, but there's nothing seems to be included within our proposals going forward for later life learning. Did you come across anything like that?
Yeah, so there's in the education bit, there's the continuing educational requirements, and in the framework, there's specific reference to opportunities around. So if you're maybe talking about learning sign language later on, that there's a discussion in the sign language framework about addressing that. But you're right, it's not specifically in the legislation proposals as they are at the moment.
I'd be keen to see that changed, because we have an instance where age-related disabilities that happen to someone after they hit pension age, you basically have all supports removed, and that's the time when an awful lot of adults whose hearing then deteriorates to the point where they could be using sign language, because even hearing aids won't help them, isn't there. The other thing I wanted to just check, was really interesting when you said, I think it was Scotland, named the other ministers, because we do have a situation at the moment where there are people who are deaf, and as you know, as you've recognised in your report, there are a number of deaf people whose educational outcomes are not fantastic, but for those who are lucky enough and have a good education and can proceed to post-school further education and higher education, they're being turned down for financial support for interpreters because the money isn't made available for some types of courses. So I noticed that Scotland named ministers, so would you advise then that would be something we should look at replicating perhaps?
So I think in Scotland it was across the board in terms of ministers' support and plans. So what I can send through to you is really what they did in Scotland was created a website that sort of very clearly lists out the 70 actions and the 10 plans and 10 long-term goals and how that sits under each different department. And then in Ireland, they've named 4 or 5 specific ministers as well in the legislation. And that refers then to the National Inclusion Strategy, the Disability Inclusion Strategy as well. So yes, it's that in terms of that collaborative piece, that's important to make sure that, because it's the funding allocations, otherwise it's then some of the budgets that I've looked at for the department at the moment, that would need to be increased if we're looking at those provisions in the long term.
The other thing I wanted to ask you about was professionals learning sign language to be able to provide more inclusive services. We did have a situation until it was rectified recently where the Department of Education, the Jordanstown School for the Deaf and Blind, had teachers. You have to have an additional qualification to be able to teach children who are deaf and use sign language, and the same for children who are blind. And to be honest, the school was actually funding that additional training until the Department of Education realised or were reminded that that was an additional qualification that they required. But I'm just thinking about across the health service, social services, teachers. Oh, it's massive. Even it's mentioned justice, access to communication services. There doesn't seem to be anything built into that to encourage and improve professionals to undertake sign language training. It's all about the use of interpreters as opposed to people learning.
Yeah, and I think that's something in the Irish legislation and the resultant policies that have come out of that. I've got quite a bit of evidence about different approaches that have been taken there, so that's something I can share with you too, if that's useful. But that is, you're right. It's something that's in the sign language framework, and it would be useful for it to be thought about inclusion in the legislation as well.
And it'd be interesting to see how effective it has been at actually being rolled out across those professional services. I'm imagining, for instance, GPs, you know, unless you have an interpreter there and you use sign language, so that's very impersonal, it loses your privacy. How many GPs have actually taken that up? How many do provide services for sign language users? I wonder if there's anything from the Irish, you know, that can reflect on how well this has been implemented and taken up.
Absolutely. And I think in terms of the scenario in Northern Ireland, the health service, the HSEB, has created a paper looking at communication services, and there's a number of recommendations that came out of that, including the use of VRS, which, as you know, there are difficulties with using that, but also then the interpretation support. And one of the key things that has come out of some of the reviews that I've seen, the initial reviews in Scotland, is that it's the interpretation support that's needed. Say if you're a student at university and it's that the skill that's needed in terms of interpreting some of the content that will be discussed, say in a lecture, that, you know, having the interpreters to be able to translate that's something that needs to be sort of thought through in the longer term planning of this as well.
My final question is anything about enforcement, because too often we hear we just don't have the money for that, or, you know, if it's not written down in black and white, we don't have to do that, you know, we can make do. How have the other areas dealt with enforcement to ensure that the legislation has gone through, and is it actually just lip service to enforcement, or is it actual, you know, what does that mean, or what does that look like in other places?
Well, so at the moment in Ireland, it hasn't come into force yet. So that'll happen in December 2020. So that there are no reviews at the moment. And then in Scotland, there was supposed to be a review in October 2020, but due to COVID-19, that's been pushed out to October 2021. Although there's some reviews that have come in for the listed authorities in Scotland, so definitely that would be something to look into as well, that those are starting to come through now and be published.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thanks Kelly, and thanks Karen. No other members indicated at this stage they want to come in, so can I thank you. No doubt we will be calling on your expertise as the bill is presented to us. And certainly there might be some questions then following, as I say, the witness session that we have in January that we might fire your way as well. So for the time being, Karen, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Okay, members, then if we can move swiftly along to agenda item number 10, which is correspondence. You'll find the memo at page 268 of your meeting pack. The committee has received a memo from the Committee for Infrastructure regarding SR 2020-249, the Taxi Driver Coronavirus Financial Assistance Regulations Northern Ireland 2020. The committee noted the possible adverse effects that the taxi driver scheme may have on those recipients who may also be in receipt of benefits, and agreed they asked the Committee for Communities to consider taking this issue up in the Department for Communities. Are members content that we write to the Department on this matter?
Agreed.
All agreed, yes.
I have nothing infrastructure.
I have nothing else I want to bring up under correspondence. Our members.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Mark.
Sorry, Chair. I take on board that this correspondence was from the Infrastructure Committee and was pertaining to that particular fund. But there's a number of financial assistance schemes across a number of departments, including those within communities that do have and will have similar implications for people's access to benefits. So while we might major on or lead with the taxi fund related query, I think that it could be and should be possibly more general as well.
Okay, fair enough, absolutely. That's grand. I have no other comments. Anybody else, any comments on the memo, Kelly?
Yeah, it's the last one on page 268 where it talks about the Shared Prosperity Fund. This is really starting to panic me now. I think we need to get an update from the department on what's going on with the Shared Prosperity Fund. There was an announcement made yesterday by the Chancellor. I'm not clear that it's actually going to cover all that communities and the Minister will need. So it would be very useful if we could either get an update from communities or economy I'm not sure which one to let us know what's actually happened with this, because if that shared prosperity fund doesn't deliver, then we're looking at supported employment, we're looking at a lot of community and voluntary sector problems. So it would be good to get an update on that from the committee if we could.
I remember, I think it was the Finance Minister was asked a few questions on it this week in the Chamber as well. So there's still not much clarification on it, but yes, certainly that we will ask for that. Sinead, did you want to come in there? Did I see your hand up, or were you just, no? No, that's okay. Just double checking. So are members then content with the correspondence memo, other than just that change has been made by Mark and Kelly? Yes, all content? Okay, then we'll move on to agenda item 11, which is forward work programme. Members, that the meeting on the 3rd of December next week will be briefed by the Northern Ireland Brewery and Independent Pub Association on the licensing, and then we'll also be briefed by the Northern Ireland Federation of Clubs on the licensing and registration of clubs bill, and then we'll have a departmental briefing on the allocation of COVID funding to the arts sector. And also then we'll have Peter Corrie, who is going to come in and brief us on the impact of COVID-19 also on the arts sector. Members, any comments on that? Content with that? Yes, agreed? Okay, then I'm going to move to agenda item 12, which is any other business. Members, any other business? No, nothing from, okay. Then I'll move on to agenda item 13, which is date, time and location of our next meeting. Our next meeting will take place here in room 29 next week, Thursday, 3rd of December at 10 a.m. Thank you, members.
Thank you.
This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29.